Saddle up your horses.
Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is another episode of the Manely Broncos Podcast, and we are excited because it is truly a crossover of sorts of not just one and not just two different podcasts, but three different podcasts, if you will. We have Building the Broncos co-host Carl Dumler, because when it is free agency, there's none better to bring on in terms of building the Broncos than Carl Dumler himself. And obviously, I say that, because Nick isn't here, but, it's still nice to have someone, in terms of understanding how to build the Broncos. And what better way to do that than do a deep dive into the Denver Broncos and talk about how can they build those Denver Broncos with none other than Dove Valley Deep Divers co-host Lance Sanderson himself. So, gentlemen, thanks for hopping on with us, man. Free agency is right around the corner, literally. I mean, it's what is it? Monday is the legal tampering period at 11 Eastern. So, thanks a lot, gentlemen, for hopping on.
Yeah, of course. It's always great to get to talk to you guys, and obviously, this is one of my favorite subjects and times of year, is getting to see how the Broncos are actually going to rebuild this roster, especially everything that happened over this last week with Russell Wilson and some of the other contracts are going to go down, of course. But no, it's just good to get to talk about this and hopefully see brighter days ahead.
And
yeah,
Lance,
it's always great to join you guys. It's been a while. It's been Brandon. You actually remember I was on your show a couple times now. Like we've actually done this now at I think 4 or 5 times.
I was gonna say this is your first time.
It is the first time. That's right. This is the first. No, for real though. It's always fun to be here with you guys and just chop it up. And like I always say, collaborative media environments are better for the fans, and I'm glad to be here with you guys.
It's actually a mix of 4 podcasts, because brand new podcast last week in Hoaxie is also Carl's new side show that no one will understand this reference, but I just had to do a call back. But no, I'm excited for something to happen this offseason because or just some kind of NFL news, because I'm getting tired of there being nothing for the past month. Just give me something. I don't even care if it's the Broncos. I just need something to happen. I need something football related in my veins, please. So we're almost there. And Russell Wilson being released officially was part of it. That was a nice little boost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's going to be an exciting time. I think that if you look at it, and this is something that I'm sure you guys touched on, and then we've touched on it too. It's like between this last free agency, or I should say this last off season, and then this off season, you'll kind of have an idea of what that plan is going to end up being in place for Sean Payton, and what he's going to end up doing, the direction that he's clearly wants to go. And clearly, the biggest domino of them all was Russell Wilson making that final call, moving on from Russell Wilson. We're not here to necessarily talk about Russell Wilson. We talk about it so much on other podcasts or, all day long. So we don't necessarily need to talk about that or rehash talking about that a little bit. But what we will talk about is possibly how can the Broncos really build that Denver Broncos team, right, Carl?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think the Broncos are completely sunk at this point. Obviously, you get the quarterback position figured out. That solves a lot of problems. But I still think there's some easy fixes to make this team better than they were last year. Especially Sean Payton, it takes 2 to 3 years to actually get your guys in place, to actually build the team how you want it to be built. And this has been part of the problem for the Broncos is when you change coaches every 2 years, maybe even every year, maybe not even every year, because Hackett didn't even make it a year. That becomes a problem when you're trying to build a team in the eyes of how the coach is trying to set it up. And so, like I said, having Sean Payton year 2, I'm expecting some better things, a little bit more consistency on both sides of the ball.
See, this is why I have this exact Deadpool scene, because every time we talk about this is my reaction. For the past 8 years, every time we talk about this team in this manner. Today also is literally the 8-year anniversary of Peyton Manning retiring, if you guys didn't realize that. So welcome to that day.
You had to. You
absolutely. But
had
you
to
asked me why I have this specific Deadpool picture, and that's why. Because every time we have this conversation about this, it's fake laugh fighting real pain. But well, you know what? It's a new year, and it's going to be different.
At least we're not like the Buffalo Bills today. Holy cow! What is going on there in Western Buffalo, man, or Western New York? Because Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, they restructured Von Miller's contract. They moved on a handful of other different players. They brought back Mitch Trubisky, which was interesting. They re-signed Buffalo's been a free agency frenzy, and we haven't even gotten to the Tampa period yet. It's crazy going on up there.
For like one team too.
One team. Because they weren't even over the cap, were they? I don't think so.
Oh, they're like $50 million over the cap.
Yeah, they were.
I'm trying to find their cap space.
Yeah. So before we dive into any of that, I just want to make sure that and remind people to subscribe to the MHRT network and make sure that if you guys are in the wanting to comment and chime in the chat, please do so. Go and you can do it through YouTube. You can actually even do it through Facebook, and actually you can even do it through X or Twitter now. You can do it through there and comment through Twitter. We also have done Twitch as well. But so it's going to be an exciting time. And if you guys have any comments in terms of for the guys, for Carl, for Brandon, Lance, or even I, will be sure to certainly answer it maybe the best way that we can and kind of pick Sean Payton's brain a little bit. So let's start first with this thing.
I had last year's cap. Okay, yeah, that's horrible. They're screwed. Never mind. Go ahead.
Let's start first with the direction that we feel like the Broncos are going to go with first, which it feels like, or address the most, if you will. And it feels like that's going to happen a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. So let's start in the trenches, not necessarily on the offensive side of the ball, the trenches, but let's start on the defensive side of the ball with the trenches down there on that defensive line. Lance, we'll start with you. It seems like, and Brandon and I had this conversation, if there's any possibility of the Broncos double dipping in free agency, maybe one like that's a splash move, like, in air quotes, a splash move, if you will, in free agency, it will be on that defensive line, but also they could add another person to that room.
Yeah, I quite honestly, I think that the defensive line is probably the biggest need for this team. And I know that sounds crazy because you've got obviously the quarterback situation. You don't know exactly what's going to happen with the wide receiver room. But that defensive line last year was terrible. They couldn't get pass pressure. They were terrible against the run. Zach Allen was really kind of a one-man show out there. And that's not to take away from DJ Jones, but he wasn't nearly as good as he was the first year that he was here in Denver. He took a big step back. It sounds like he's probably going to be a cut candidate to save like $10 million against the salary cap. So they've got to find another body. Mike Purcell, another player that's probably on his way out here in Denver as well. They've got to find at least one body, probably two, and double dipping in free agency. What cap space are we talking about here, guys? I mean, there's a path to get, I think, like $45 million in cap space, but if you do that, you're moving on from not only Jones, but probably guys like Garrett Bowles, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick's going to be probably on the way out or back on a restructured deal. I mean, Justin Simmons still has his deal to work with, so you don't have a whole lot of money to be able to do something. So you're probably looking at lower tier veteran free agents that can come in and fill a role. And a guy that I like a lot is Sebastian Joseph Day, if he's still available, man. I mean, he's a quality pass rusher if he gets the opportunity to do it, a quality run defender, bounced around the league for a couple of years now. And I don't think you're going to get him for any more than $4 million, if even that. I mean, he's going to be a cheaper veteran free agent that you can come in and just kind of bolster the room.
What about you, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, some of those names you listed, I'm not sure how much is really going to break my heart to see some of them go.
Right.
I mean, it does produce a little bit of a hole on the team, especially like Garrett Bowles. Who are you going to put at left tackle? But obviously those guys haven't changed this culture. They've not helped this team win a ton of games over all these years. It's not all their fault by any means. But, if Jerry Jeudy gets traded, honestly, I might cheer a little bit because he's been such a disappointment on this roster. Cortland Sutton, I might shed a little bit of a tear because I've liked Cortland Sutton. But again, I could probably name 20 receivers that I would take over him in a heartbeat right now. And this is a great wide receiver class. So I don't mind some of the starting over at that position if that's what we have to do. Justin Simmons, he would be another one that I'd probably be pretty upset if he was let go, because I do think he's a really good leader and he could be part of the fixing of this roster. But you're right. The defensive line definitely has to be one of the biggest focuses of this team. That run defense was atrocious. I mean, the start of the season, you could argue that was the worst run defense the NFL has ever seen. You know, they got a few things figured out as the season went on and got lucky on some turnovers and stuff like that. But a couple guys I wouldn't mind. Maurice Hurst from the Browns. He's really cheap this last year. He's not going to cost a whole lot. You can get him for 1 to 2 years. He had a great season. The one guy that might cost a little bit, but I think he would be worth it, would be Grover Stewart from Indy. You know, I would be willing to cut DJ Jones to get Grover Stewart in here and probably have to sign him to a 3-year, $30 million kind of deal. And you can have the cap hit bigger each year kind of thing. But he's an incredible run stuffer. He would really change things, make life for Allen next to him so much easier, allow the edge guys a little bit more comfort in knowing they're going to have some one-on-one situations, the linebackers behind them. He would be a great one. Some other cheap options like Daquan Jones. He's 33, but he's still playing at a pretty darn good level. Armon Watts is another one. Again, these are bargain bin guys. These are not like your top tier type players. You're not going to get those this season. But these are players that I think if you add them to that room, takes that room up to a whole nother level when it comes to run defense and at least gets you to an average, respectable level.
Right. What about you, Brendan? This obviously we've talked a little bit about the defensive line a few times, but have you changed your opinion on maybe on some of the free agents we talked about?
Not specifically. I was going to say when we were already talking about the defensive line and the cap black hole, I guess that we're in right now, is one of the guys that like who's probably going to be an obvious cut candidate. And I say candidate, but I would be pretty shocked, to be honest, if DJ Jones is still on this roster. Is unfortunately on that defensive line. Like even if we kept DJ Jones, which I don't see us doing because we could save so much money by cutting him, we was still, I believe, statistically the worst defense against the run in the NFL, and that was after we cleaned it up after the first horrible few weeks and the had like the run of like turnover luck. We still finished as like the worst run defense in the NFL. There are a few guys that are intriguing to me that are, again, I think going to have to be, you kind of have to go the cheap route, but I've said this, I think a couple weeks ago, if you're going to spend money in free agency on one position, this is probably the position that I would do it on. And like one guy who's, I feel like everyone wants him, and he's definitely going to be fairly, I don't think he's going to be like horrifically expensive, but you're going to have to spend up to get him, is Tier Tart, who's
popular name.
Super popular name. Yeah.
Great
defensive lineman, good against the run. He's like, would probably be one of my top free agent wish list players. I don't know if we're going to have any chance to get him at all because he's going to be incredibly, even for what he's going to get, which I don't think it's going to like break the bank, but it's going to be, you're going to have to spend up to get him. Sebastian Joseph Day is really interesting. I didn't really think about him. Weren't we in on him when he was a free agent before we went to the Chargers? I believe we were kind of like in that sort of six. I do like him. Sheldon Rankins is intriguing. He's not fantastic, but he's 30. He might not be that expensive. Although I would probably assume the Texans want him back.
That was kind of the buzz that I had heard, was that Rankins was probably going to be back in Houston. Another name that
they might even tag him, but yeah, he's an interesting.
Oh, really? Sorry, I'm like stepping all over you, dude.
No, you're good. Like I feel like they could, not like a restricted free agent or something, but we'll see. I don't think they're going to let him go. But go ahead.
Well, one name that was just released, I believe yesterday, from Jacksonville. If you're looking for a nose tackle, like a true interior run stuffer, he got dramatically overpaid a couple of years ago in free agency. Folorunso Fatukasi. I mean, you're talking a big plug in the middle, and he's a great two gapper if that's what you're looking for. Really good run stopper. Doesn't offer a whole lot in terms of pass rush on the inside, but if you're looking to upgrade the run defense and you're trying to spend maybe a premium, I don't know he's going to get $10 million like he did on the free agent market a couple of years ago on an average per year basis. But if you could get him for $6 or $7 million, maybe a 1-year deal, and just try to help fortify the offense or the defensive line a little bit, that might be a name that could be intriguing for the Broncos.
Yeah,
they just cut him, didn't they? Like they already cut him.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely. Fairly recently.
Yeah, he's a street free agent too, so that goes into the compensatory pick formula as well. So that also adds into a little bit of the value that he has. So you don't, if you do sign him, you don't have the potential possibility of losing a compensatory pick in 2026, I believe is how that works for that. Regardless.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is that this is an important thing of note, not just in talking about the defensive line, but just free agency in general. If they are recently released, they actually are free to sign with a team immediately versus, the very famous, agreed in principle statement that happens every once in a while. Of course, come this free agency time where you see the agreed in principle, but until you see it on that dotted line or you see it through that Twitter account that gets announced by the team, so it kind of gives you that extra stress. We don't need a Randy Gregory situation, where, you think he's headed for Dallas and then 5 minutes later he's a Denver Bronco. I see some people in the chat, by the way. Muhammad Badri's in the chat. Clayton's in the house, of course. Looks like we have Big Mike. Shout out to him. Happy birthday, man. Happy 11th birthday to you. I'm kidding. But happy birthday, Big Mike. Yeah, so
let me ask you. I'll just ask our guests a quick question because I'm curious to know like what other people say about this. How do you guys feel about the recently released Christian Wilkins?
Or not tagging them, I guess that would be the
not tagging it, but didn't they cut him? Think they cut him.
Did they cut him?
I think I think they just they're letting him test free agency.
Like not tag him.
They didn't tag him. I think he's a really good player. I think he's one of those guys. He's right on that edge. It's kind of like a quarterback that's like 12th ranked quarterback. Do you pay them big money? Because I mean, if you go to the other side and you're with a quarterback that's in the bottom 5, your team is going to suck. But at the same time, if you pay a top 12 quarterback, top 5 money, your team's going to struggle as well. And I feel like Wilkins kind of falls into that place where he's won that top level money, top 5 money for his position. And I don't quite view him as that level. He's in that next tier of guys.
The reason I ask this question is like he was super, super good coming into the league in 2019 and 2020, and actually in 2021. Like he was good for the first few years of his career, and then this last year he kind of wasn't as good for some reason, right. Which like would maybe give you a bit of a, if you still believe in him, like you could maybe get him for a slight discount because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Like maybe he had a lingering injury that wasn't official.
Well, and Vic Fangio is the other.
I was just about to go there. He's good call, Carl.
He's one of those guys that you either really thrive in his system or you see that drop because he's asking you to do things that you have not done before. He's not always playing you to your strengths. He's saying, my system is great. You either get on board with my system or you get out of here. Yeah. And that, like I said, that works with some players. Doesn't work with others. Like Justin Simmons thrived with Vic Fangio. Loved
almost
it.
Different systems too.
I'm getting Von Miller in coverage vibes.
Yeah. Von Miller, his career started tanking when Vic Fangio came. And so I think that could be part of it with him. And if you can get a little bit of a discount, I still think he's going to be out of range for the Broncos. So I would love to have him because I think he would be a really good fit with Vance Joseph and his attacking system, like his ability to one gap and get into the backfield. He's great at that. But I was going to ask you about another player because he almost was a Bronco.
Yeah.
And then he kind of did the other side of it of where he went to the Bengals. DJ Reader is a free agent. Are you in or out on that kind of guy?
Well, I tell you, for me, if there was what you would call splash move for me, it would possibly be going either aside from the Christian Wilkins thing, because obviously Christian Wilkins, he's probably going to command like the $20 million a year, route. But I mean, I don't necessarily foresee DJ Reader getting, in that territory. But he's a guy that if you're going to focus on and maybe try and reconvince him to come to Denver, he's a very durable guy. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is, I mean, not to go full comparison here a little bit, but it's like between he and I want to say DJ Jones, back when I think right around the time when they were signing DJ Jones, like they were some of the top run stuffers on the market, right? Like they were some really good run stuffers on that market. And then Reader was obviously really close to being a Denver Bronco, and then he went and signed with the other B team, the Cincinnati Bengals. So I would not be opposed to it one bit. And actually, one of the things that's kind of fascinating to me is I like the idea of being semi-aggressive in that. And what I'm saying by that is I don't necessarily, like another person that I had in mind, I don't necessarily know what his market would be, but I could see a team overpaying for him. One, because he was in the Super Bowl on a Super Bowl team, but two, he's also very, very young, and he's a very popular name that I mentioned a few times on the network. But Javon Kinlaw, like I think that Javon Kinlaw, given the youth, and if you're trying to like build this team, right? Like if you're going to try and build this team, maybe adding some of that youth movement along with a guy like a DJ Reader, and truly kind of like being aggressive in some way, actually, may help you, right? Like it actually may help you too, like with some of those edge rushers in the room. So maybe the Broncos, like here's a twist to this, maybe they actually feel comfortable with that edge room. And in doing so, because they feel so comfortable with their edge room, they're actually going to be spending, maybe a little bit more time on that interior to actually help those guys like a Nick Bonito, Baron Browning, to get to the quarterback just a little bit better.
I do like DJ Reader. I think one of the question marks on him is going to be the quad injury that he suffered in December. I think like it was pretty recent, and unfortunately, he's also like not. He's still 29. He's not 30 yet, but he'll be 30 before the start of the season. So like coming back from that injury at the higher age kind of could make people a bit wary on him, but he also had literally the exact same injury in the other leg in 2020. And then he came back the next year and he was like fantastic. So you never really know, but I wouldn't be out on DJ Reader at all. I think he has stated multiple times that he wants to stay in Cincinnati. But if you can get him, I'd be for it.
Yeah. I never get why somebody wants to go to Cincinnati, because like usually when the NFLPA stuff that comes out, a lot of the players rank them as one of the worst organizations of making you have to pay for food and all these other extra things that other teams give players for free. I just, like I said, I'm always kind of shocked players don't mind going there. I still am rubbed a little bit of the wrong way. Like when he chose Cincinnati, and like people were asking like, hey, why'd you choose Cincinnati over the Broncos? And he's like, because I want to go win. And that kind of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way, but he wasn't wrong either. So it's kind of hard to fault him completely on saying that.
I was just about to say the Skyline Chili, Carl. You have to know the Skyline Chili is definitely where it's at. I mean, it's worse for you than the double down chicken sandwich from KFC in terms of calorie intake. But Skyline Chili. I want to go back to the Broncos here for just a minute in terms of an interior defensive lineman that they're going to take another opportunity on. I mean, let's not forget, guys, the Broncos did just draft Wazirike a couple of years ago, 4th round pick out of Iowa State. He's suspended all last year for gambling. And talking with Eric Trickle, and I brought this up on DVDD, I believe last week. There's a lot of upside there. There really was, and it sounded like he was really showing out in OTAs right before he got suspended. So what do you think of bringing in a guy like a DJ Reader, and then kind of just seeing what goes with Wazirike here, because he showed a lot of growth. That game against the Chargers in Denver that he had his rookie season was freaking phenomenal. I about cussed there. But like he's explosive. He's got a great first step. He uses his length well. He's just developing into a player that could really become a quality interior defensive lineman. I'm not saying like let's hang our hats on him and really want him to be the guy to step up. But what are you guys' thoughts on him?
My thought there would be, well, what's his timeline, right? Because like I still think his timeline is still kind of TBD to where. Will he even be available? Right? Maybe
he should be available for camp. He won't be available for OTAs because he was suspended in late July, so he should be available for camp.
Right? Was he like officially sentenced? I just never looked this up after I heard.
No, the charges were dropped.
The charges were dropped. Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be mad about bringing it back at all.
Well, I mean, I want to bring him in.
But I think it would be
another.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say. I mean. You need as many camp bodies as you can get. And if he has some upside, go ahead and bring him in. I'm not going into free agency with the idea of, hey, this is one of our guys.
That's exactly what
he's
a depth guy.
I'm going to probably go sign 2 guys this offseason. Not one, maybe decent contract, one probably below average contract. That third tier defensive lineman that's just going to come in for 400 or 500 snaps at tops for the season kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to hope that he's going to turn into something. And I'm probably going to take a rookie as well at some point in the draft that I'm going to hope I can develop over time. How early in the draft, I mean, that's kind of up in the air, but yeah, so then you've got a nice group of guys that have some decent upside. You can put 4, 5, 6 of these guys together and feel like you actually have a decent group heading into the season. But like I said, I'm not going to bank on him being that guy for you.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like if you told me our defensive line plan, because I do think this is such a weakness that you have to make this a priority, is we like our main guy is, let's say, Grover Stewart, and then we go bring back Wazirike as like a depth piece, and we cut DJ Jones, and maybe we even draft a rookie late and just like add to that room. I would be okay with that. But yeah, if you told me they're like, oh, well, we're just going to sign Wazirike, we're going to cut DJ Jones, we're going to maybe draft someone, but that's it. I'm scared.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say is that and this is not draft talk by any means, but we also have to remember too, this is a rather deep defensive line class too. Like this is a rather good defensive line class, and possibly even like versatile players, right? Like versatile players that you could play like a D end or on the inside. So I mean, it's a really fun class there. And so I'm not trying to say that it's certainly a possible that Wazirike, the moment he gets reinstated, if you will, he may even be off the roster. I will say that it was a bit surprising that he was even kept on the roster, given everything that happened with him and that gambling thing. But the fact he is still on the roster is more, of a positive than anything else. But I think the fact that it's such a good class in this draft, I feel is more damage necessarily to him long-term, depending on what they could do in the draft. And depending on if they select a guy like, early day 3 or possibly maybe in that 3rd round, right? Like if they draft a guy in that 3rd round, then you're probably talking about a guy that is truly going to be competing, and maybe more snaps, if you will, than a guy like a Wazirike. Let's go. And we touched briefly on the edge room and maybe how the interior could help, with maybe some of that edge room. Obviously, if there was, the Broncos wanted to just do a sole focused, mentality of let's bring in a dominant edge rusher number 1. And let's be honest, the Broncos have not had that kind of edge rusher. It's unfortunate since number 58's been in the building. A healthy number 58 has been in the building. There is certainly one player that really comes to mind there. And of course, funny enough, George Payton drafted him.
Danielle Hunter, please.
But how realistic, and I'll just use this as a comparison in the way, how realistic would Danielle Hunter be regarding the Denver Broncos versus obviously a Brian Burns? Because I mean, Obviously, you're talking an age difference, right? You're talking an age difference, 25 years old versus 29 years old. But man, there's maybe some, and what was it? ESPN, Jeremy Fowler mentioned that the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Denver Broncos are actually some possibilities for Danielle Hunter. So I guess for you guys, like, how realistic is a guy like that?
I would say the only way you ever get a chance to sign him is if Sutton, Simmons, Bulls, all the receivers are gone, and you decide like we're completely starting over and we're going to say that this is one of our core pieces moving forward. And you have to really work that contract to have big hits later on. I can't see a big name free agent in this draft. And Hunter, from what all I've seen so far with his time in Minnesota, like he wants that big contract. He's not going to take a discount to go somewhere. He held out for a while there with Minnesota because he was not liking his contract situation. And like I said, being that older guy, it's not really a guy I want to have as one of my core guys. Like if I'm viewing, hey, we're building for the next 2 to 3 years. Well, this guy's going to be 31 at that kind of time. So again, that's why I would probably stay away from him. I'd be looking at some of the younger guys that maybe have some higher upside. And I think there's some decent names hitting the market that I have some questions of why in the world haven't they played more so far? Like a Josh Uche of the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
When he has played, the guy has been outstanding. But for some reason, Bill Belichick did not like to give this guy snaps. Bryce Huff. Yeah. Like if you take his per snap basis, he is a top 3 pass rusher in football, but they just don't give him a whole lot of snaps. And those guys are still going to be, I think, out of the Broncos area. I'd probably still bring in somebody for the edge position. I'd probably be looking at a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel of the Dolphins.
Yeah.
Wisconsin ties, by the way.
He's just he's a good all-around player. He's going to help you in the run game, something the Broncos are missing at the edge position right now. He does decent in the pass game. He's not great by any means. He's not great at anything, but he's good at a lot of things. And then the other guy he's a huge risk because of how many injuries he's had, but he's a guy that Sean Payton loved, Marcus Davenport.
Yeah.
He's not going to cost anything to come in. You could probably put him on a very incentive-driven contract. Say, hey, your base salary is $1 million, $1.5 million. You get 5 sacks. We add another $2 million. You get 10 sacks. We add this much. Again, he hasn't played very many games of recent, but when he has played, he's been a decent player. And again, he's big, he's strong, he can help hold up in the run game. And I think he'd be a nice addition to this rotation.
What about you, Lance?
I don't really like this edge class at all. I'm kind of digging through it. I mean, Caleb Von Chasen would be a name in terms of a younger guy, 25 years old. He came into the NFL really young for the Jaguars. And there's incredible upside there. I mean, I remember people talking about him potentially being a first-round pick. I think he was drafted round, if I remember correctly. Regardless, that's a guy that has Batman ability. And Eric and I talk about this all the time. When it comes to the edge room right now, the Broncos have a bunch of Robins and nobody that really has that true game-changing pass rush skill set. And that's even talking with Nick Benito, because you look at his sacks last year, put him back on tape. 75% of them he came unblocked off the edge. It was some of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in my life. So with like Baron Browning guys, Jonathan Cooper, are those guys really guys you want to rely on and hang your hat on as going to be high quality players that are going to turn into Batmans? Probably not. So if you're looking for me, I mean, Bryce Huff is an intriguing name. I think there is some Batman ability there, like Carl was talking about just a little bit ago. one of the, I think, top 3 in terms of pass rush win rate and for usage anyways in the NFL this last season. So that would be a guy that really intrigues me. Another one, if he was actually able to get away, he's an exclusive rights free agent for the Lions, James Houston. That kid was really fun to watch a couple of years ago, and obviously they went out and they got Aiden Hutchinson and another player as well. But James Houston is a player that when he was kind of the one guy out there for the Lions a couple of years ago, he really started to steal the limelight for that Lions defense, which obviously wasn't very great, but he was one of the bright shining upcomers in terms of edge rushers at the NFL level. So that would be a name that I'm intrigued to see if he actually does become available on the market. But as an exclusive rights free agent, he's going to make like $850,000 this year. So I don't think the Lions are going to let him go.
Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, Danielle Hunter is my probably
right.
favorite person in this offseason that we could sign as a free agent, but I also think it is incredibly unlikely that he would come. 1, I don't think we can afford him. 2, I don't think, like, he is almost 30. So, like, 1, he wants the contract, but I also have to imagine that he also wants to win, and we don't have the money, and we also can't win. So we can't give him either of the things that he's looking for. He would be, if I would spend all my money, like, I know I said the defensive line would be where if I was the GM, that's where I would do it. If I could just do whatever I wanted and I was picking one person, I'd be like, I want Danielle Hunter, because that room full of Robins is like probably the best way I've ever heard this described.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Like, we have a bunch of rotational edge players. We don't have Von Miller. We don't have the one person that they're scared to block, that they don't know where he's going to come from. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to stop him. The guy that keeps the offensive coordinator up at night, figuring out how do I negate this player. We don't have that guy. We have guys that can get after the quarterback. We have guys that can play a few snaps, but we don't have the dude. And that's the biggest thing that we need in that room is the dude. There is a guy that, unfortunately, I'm going to put him back in I would be absolutely shocked if he is available, or they let him get away at all. But Jonathan Grenard from the Texans as well, who I can't imagine them letting him go, because him and Will Anderson have been a phenomenal duo. You talked about pass rush win rate. Grenard, I think, is top 6 or something. Like, he's a really good pass rusher. Had like the best year of his career last year. I wouldn't put him in the tier, obviously, like Danielle Hunter is. Like, he's not. I would put him kind of probably around like if Bryce Huff was given the snaps that he should have. He's a guy that is interesting to me. I don't know if I'd break the bank for him, and I don't think at all if the Texans are going to let him go. The one guy in this class, again, to me is Hunter. That is the guy that I want. But there are some other names. This is the thing that just, like, I think kind of sucks, because I also don't really think it's a fantastic edge draft class. But I do think we need to find a way to find the guy. I don't know if we're going to find him this year, which sucks, but we need to.
And I think that's why I was kind of saying, like, it depends in the way that the Broncos attack this, because if they really are heavy on the defensive line, right? Heavy on the defensive line, that in turn could help, like that edge rush unit, those pass rush unit to, get consistently home, if you will, depending on, what is like, and even too, like if the Broncos do feel somewhat comfortable, with that room, minus maybe a guy that they want to add, I'm curious about, how they're going to look at this room, specifically. I think that for the Broncos and the way that they could look about it, I do like how it was described that, it's nothing but, a ton of Robins, if you will, right? Like, it was nothing but a ton of Robins. And so I will say, too, like, I think the best comparison, and we'll talk about it probably with the wide receiver room, but I feel like the wide receiver room and the edge room is so similar. It's so similar in the way, like, it really is kind of full of a bunch of Robins and not really that Batman. And I think that we've even mentioned that a few times. I think for me, you mentioned Van Ginkel, Carl, Wisconsin ties. I was actually going to go with another route, another player with Wisconsin ties. And funny enough, New Orleans Saints ties. And that would be a guy by the name of Zach Bond. He's another one, an outside linebacker, but he's another one that, certainly seems like he's available. It certainly seems like he's possibly going to be leaving New Orleans. And I could see a reunion, of course, with Jim Leonard. And I think that the Jim Leonard stuff, depending on what the Broncos certainly view in their future plans, also here too. I'm curious about, how truly the Broncos are going to attack it from the defensive side of the ball, because of course, that's the Vance Joseph like underlying thing. Like, what is the future plans going to be for a guy like a Vance Joseph? And does Jim Leonard actually have a future of being a defensive coordinator here? So I think that there could be those guys like, both of those scenarios where Van Ginkel and a Zach Bond are coming to play for the Denver Broncos because of the Jim Leonard ties. I will say another one of those type of players. He's not a Batman, but I will say he is the Mr. Consistent when it comes to getting to the quarterback and pressuring the quarterback, and that is a Yannick Ngakoue. And so that's one of those cases. If you feel really, really good about your defensive line group that you will add in free agency and the draft, Yannick Ngakoue, I feel like, is a guy that's obviously a step above what you do have in that room. He's not a Batman necessarily by any means, but he is definitely better with what you have in that room. And so I think that he would be a very curious addition for a guy like, for Vance Joseph and possibly even a Jim Leonard to see what he can do, because he is a model of consistency, since he's been in the league.
I want to throw out one more name. And this would be a 1-year deal. And it wouldn't be that expensive. He has been probably the most consistent pass rusher throughout his entire career that I've ever seen. And he keeps, like, everybody's like, he's old. And how does he keep doing this? But Brandon Graham, like, he's 36, and yet he still finished top 10 in pass rush win rate last year. He still finished 20th in pass rush grade on PFF. This guy just keeps doing it. And, if I'm looking at a guy that can maybe help some of these younger guys, because the Broncos have a lot of young players in that room. Like, I'm thinking of a Nick Bonito. He could really benefit from having a great veteran work with him. I think of DeMarcus Ware working with Von Miller. Like, that transformed his career. Like, Von Miller was great.
Even Browning, too.
And Baron Browning, too. Yeah. Sometimes you need that of a veteran that these guys can really look up to. And like I said, it's going to be a 1-year deal. It's not going to cost you a ton. But I think it could be a decent signing. It's not going to move the needle a ton. But like I said, just for those young guys, it could really amp them up to another level as well.
All right, let's move to the other area.
Just real quick, to toss a name in that similar pile of like guys that are somehow still doing it, but they're kind of older.
Yeah.
Danico Autry.
It's
pretty much the same thing they just talked about with Brandon Graham, but
yeah,
that's all I'm gonna say there. He's interesting.
Well, what is it? You also have Emmanuel Ogbah, who recently just joined the market. You have Carl Lawson, who's out there on the market. You have Zadarius Smith, that's also out there on the market. So there's certainly some players, but obviously not anybody that you would feel very confident in saying that like they're a Batman, right? And that's the theme, right? Let's go to the other area of that front seven, and that being the linebacker position, because it certainly seems from everything that we're reading and that we're hearing that Josie Jewell, the outlaw, his days in Denver, they're gone. That he will be moving on to a new team, and that Alex Singleton will be having someone opposite of him. And we will try our hardest not to have a Drew Sanders conversation in this, but the reason why the Broncos may find themselves into this conversation is due to the fact that I will say maybe because of the fact that Drew Sanders is going to be moved a little bit to that edge room. So because of that, it seems like the Broncos are going to be searching for a linebacker that's going to be opposite of Alex Singleton.
Yeah, and to me, the one guy that's out there has already been kind of linked to the Broncos. I believe it was ESPN did a report on the top 50 free agencies, and
A lot of money there.
I don't give a damn. We're talking. Brandon was talking about that one player that's like, you know what? If I'm going to go spend the bag on a guy like the one player I really want, it's Patrick Queen, man. That dude. I know the Broncos were interested in him in the draft a couple of years ago, and he is just phenomenal. He flies around the field. He's a hell of a football player, hell of a tackler, good in coverage. Has grown to be one of the better linebacker players in the NFL. And yeah, I know it's going to cost you probably 16, 17, 18 million dollars a season to get him in here, but you know what, dude? Like, you want to talk about an upgrade, pair him with Alex Singleton and just watch those guys fly to the football, because that's what both of those two dudes do the best. I mean, Singleton, obviously we know the tackling prowess that he has. Queen would just take this defense to another level, especially with Vance Joseph and the aggressiveness he likes to throw from the second level in terms of being a blitzer. Queen's a hell of a blitzer too, dude. Like, that's the guy. But whoever wrote that article that said that the dream free agent for the Broncos this season, saying it was Patrick Queen, absolutely spot on in my opinion.
Carl,
I have a hard time spending that money on that guy, because I still question how much of that really is him just going to an incredible system, incredible coaching, great players next to him with Roquan Smith, making his job so much easier. I mean, I'm still kind of in the boat. I wouldn't mind bringing back Josie Jewell because he's not going to cost a ton. And I like some of that consistency from year in, year out, especially your play caller, the guy on the field that's getting everybody lined up. I think he does a great job with that. Another guy that I have loved since even when he was getting drafted, just won himself a Super Bowl, Drew Tranquill. You know, I think he came in for some injured players there, and, you know, his first part of his career was not great. Like, the kid needed some time, but he really showed this last year. Like, when the Chiefs absolutely needed a play, somehow he was the guy to go make that play. I mean, he did great coming downfield, dropping back in coverage. He's got enough athleticism. He's not going to cost a ton of money, I don't think. I wouldn't mind him coming over here to Denver.
What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, there's a name that is interesting to me, and like I don't know how I feel about him. I don't know if I necessarily would like pound the table for him, because he's been weirdly inconsistent in his career. But Jordan Brooks from Seattle is at his fifth-year option declined. And when he was drafted, I remember everyone was like, this guy is a reach.
Yeah.
His first rookie season, he kind of proved them right. Then he comes in his sophomore year and is just like a tackling machine. Bro had 184 tackles that year.
Wow.
He's kind of dropped down like every year since then. He's kind of gone down in the tackling department, but he's just like super consistent. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Josie Jewell when Josie Jewell was coming out of college. And I know obviously Jordan Brooks is not coming out of college, but he was that guy who's like the super consistent tackler. He didn't have a year at Iowa where he had less than 100 tackles. So Jordan Brooks to me is interesting. Like the downside is like he isn't consistent. That's his problem. He will like be really, really good in coverage and miss on a read, but he'll like tackle the guy, or he'll like this last season, he's kind of stepped it up a little bit in the pass rush and he gets after the quarterback a little bit more, but his tackling ability sort of like dropped a little bit. He's not like a guy that I would say he's not at that Patrick Queen level, but I think he would be an interesting dart throw to see what happens. It's a bit of a gamble. It's a bit of a coin flip, but he's proven that he's done everything that linebackers have been asked to do well. He's just never done them well at the same time. He's interesting.
You know, it's funny.
But they declined his fifth-year option for a reason. Like,
you know, it's funny you do say dart, but I'm really curious to see what the Vance Joseph stuff could possibly impact this, because of the the situation and the ties, but also we know of how much of a versatile freak that he has been since coming into the league. I mean, he may have been one of, if not the most versatile athletes to come and, be a draft prospect in quite some time. But obviously, the joke had been, well, he just wasn't utilizing him, right? He wasn't utilizing him really well. And he moves on from Arizona. He goes on and he's now with the New York Giants. Isaiah Simmons Isaiah Simmons is still a fascinating name to me in this, because again, like, I'm not trying to basically say this from the standpoint of Vance Joseph. I just don't know if he'll be here next year kind of thing, but it's just like, I'm more curious necessarily because his versatility. What would a guy like Jim Leonard also do with a guy like Isaiah Simmons? And so, I mean, in terms of just the overall versatility of it. So just Isaiah Simmons meshed in with a little bit of, Vance Joseph and kind of maybe what he would like to do. But I know that Leonard is aggressive. He's very, very aggressive, but also he really likes those versatile weapons too, of within that secondary and kind of what they've been able to play with the Rovers and stuff like that. And Isaiah Simmons, I mean, it's what Spot Trek has it at about 16 a year, which obviously, which does seem quite steep. I don't know if he'll get that by any means, but he is certainly still a fascinating name, if you will, that I kind of have in the back of my brain. It's could we possibly see a little bit of a reunion here? I don't know.
I don't know how they could be saying he's going to get that kind of money. He only had 378 snaps this last year. So, I mean, while he was decent in those snaps, it's not like he played a ton this last year. And, he's had 2 seasons under 400 snaps. It's kind of hard to tell exactly where he should be playing. Safety, linebacker, where you really put him. This is why I hate hybrid players.
Yeah.
If I'm a GM, I'm not drafting those kind of guys. I would stay away from them, because I don't like this idea of not having a true position for them, especially as a rookie. I don't want them learning 2 positions. I want them learning one true position, saying this is where you're going to be in the NFL. I get you can have some extra little plays to maybe utilize what they can bring to the table, but beyond that, I'm not going to be moving around that much. So Isaiah Simmons, if he's going to cost that much money, no. If he's like $5 million a year, okay, I'm willing to take that kind of chance, because he is an athletic freak.
Yeah,
I'm with you on that, Carl. There you go, and that's another thing. Is here's the thing: when you go with what Vance Joseph showed, even using Isaiah Simmons himself, what was his role in that defense?
Yeah.
We're just going to plug you in on the overhang and let you go run after the football. How do you incorporate him into this defense right now with Vance Joseph? He did it again with Drew Sanders. He did it in his time with the Cardinals with a guy like Zaven Collins, the linebacker. Was he playing on the edge? Was he playing off the ball? So I guess this would come into the question. I'm not going to try to be an asshole here, but I'm going to bring up a very valid point. When it comes to Vance Joseph using these multiplicity style players, these very versatile players that really kind of can do a bunch of different things, but don't have an identified specific role, does Vance Joseph even know what he's doing with players like that? Because it doesn't seem that he's been able to show the ability to do that the entire time he's been a defensive coordinator.
Yeah. And again, it's just kind of like a curious thought that I have in my mind. And it's not, I should say, it's not even necessarily a Vance Joseph conversation for me. It's what would the future be with a guy like it? It's more the Jim Leonard conversation necessarily than the Vance Joseph conversation, because of the point that I just don't know if Vance Joseph is going to be here. So and that's the other thing. A side story of this free agency is Sean going to be bringing players in, if you will, that's maybe a little bit more favorable for a guy like a Jim Leonard, than a Vance Joseph, and then at that point that might be a little bit telling.
I mean, I do think the nice thing for Sean Payton is he's got 2 built-in scapegoats for next year, Vance Joseph and George Payton. So, I mean, it is nice that way. And like I said, you do have Jim Leonard who can come in, play that defensive coordinator spot for you. He's done it plenty. He's done great at it. And I think he would do fine at it. But yeah, I guess I'm not really thinking if I'm a coach or a GM, I'm not thinking, hey, how's this guy going to do with the next defensive coordinator?
No, I agree. Yeah.
You know, I would have trouble thinking that way because you're not guaranteed that Jim Leonard's going to stick around.
Right.
You know, maybe he gets a better offer to go be a head coach in the college level, and that's what he loves is more the college game than the NFL.
No, I agree.
You know, so that's kind of my thought is I better be getting guys that I know can fit with the coach here. And if I'm signing a guy like Isaiah Simmons, I'm not doing a long-term contract. It's a 2-year deal with a lot of incentives built into it. You know, that's what most of these guys would be, is these 1 to 2 year deals where you're able to move on from them pretty darn quick. And you hope that they can bring something, but you're not really expecting much more than league average from most of them.
But as far as I should say that was more of a fascinating name. As far as a realistic, Vance Joseph tie name, I should say that would probably fall in lines with maybe like a Jordan Hicks. Hicks obviously has got a lot more, conversation and or ties, if you will, to Vance Joseph. So I think that, you're probably leaning a little bit more there. The only unfortunate thing there is he's 32 years old, right? He's like 32 years old. So, do they lean a little bit more, obviously, to the draft also for that position? But I do think the linebacker position is not to circle back on Patrick Queen for a second, but I do think it's a kind of like a very under the radar possible one where they can make a splash move that's not on that defensive line, right? And obviously when we say splash move, we're saying like those big contracts, if you will, not necessarily, like those like 1 year, we're signing Chase Young for like a 1 year, $7 million contract or something like that. That's more of a splash player name versus a splash actual like contract, if you will.
Yeah, I just, my big issue there, and this would be like if you go spend big money on the cornerback position and you have no pass rush. Like if you go sign a big linebacker and you don't have great defensive linemen in front of them, you can't maximize their talent on the field. Like they can drop back in coverage and do fine that way, but actually helping in the run game, they're going to get so bogged up in the traffic, they're not going to be able to use that athleticism like a Patrick Queen to go make plays in the backfield. So I still would rather go towards the defensive line or even edge position if I'm going to spend big, because those are the guys that truly make everything better for all the other players behind them. You can have an average secondary and a great defensive line, and you're going to do great. Look at 49ers, just had that this last year. They don't have a ton of great players in the secondary. They're good. Don't get me wrong. They're not like terrible players, but because they have great pass rushers and can get after you with 4, it allows them to do so much more on that back end. And so to me, that's the better way to spend your money if you want to really impact the entire defense.
One final name, at least on my benefit, so I can actually sound smart, would be Blake Cashman. I think Blake Cashman would be another name that I would actually, if I was actually more along the lines of actually wanting a guy, Blake Cashman would certainly be one of those players that I would be very, pounding the table of. I mean, this is a guy that was like truly like a tackling machine. You want to talk about a guy that necessarily kind of compares a little bit to Josie Jewell coming out of college. Well,
yeah,
you don't need to look no further than, him coming from the Big Ten. I mean, the guy actually came from the Big Ten. He played with Minnesota. He was actually maybe their anchor of their defense, with the Gopher defense. I mean, he's truly a tackling machine, and he had an unbelievable year with Houston. And actually not necessarily of the Alex Singleton types, but I mean, he was a guy that really blew up that year with, Cashman. So I'm not necessarily saying that the Broncos will sign him to that Singleton contract, which, was that minimum, if you will, the 1 year, $1.5 million contract. And then he blew up and he signed the big deal that he did. So Blake Cashman is maybe the linebacker, if I'm being completely honest, that I'm pounding the table for, would be Cashman.
I have one final like mid-round guy, I guess, that I would not really mid-round, but if you were asking me what I want to do on this defensive front, I would say I want to spend my money on the defensive line, and then I want to bring in a good linebacker, but not someone that's like I would love Patrick Queen, but I agree with the if you don't have a great defensive line, but you have a fantastic linebacker, you're like you have a fantastic linebacker, but you can't really use him. And a guy that I think is just solid is someone that actually played for the 49ers last year is Oren Burks, who came over from the Packers. He didn't really play a ton for them. Like he had like less than 400 snaps, but similar to like Isaiah Simmons, but he's not Isaiah Simmons. And ironically, also similar to Isaiah Simmons, he just kind of was all over the field. He was making plays as a pass rusher. He had several tackles for loss. I think even a couple of them were in one game. He had an interception for them. He had like 50 tackles, and this was in like 300 snaps. He had an interception. I might have already mentioned that. He was kind of all over the field. He did a little bit of everything. He's not Patrick Queen, but if you're going to say, just get a guy that's not going to break the bank and invest your money in the defensive line, you could do worse.
Yeah. Let's go to the secondary, and we won't look at positions of like solely cornerback and safety. We'll kind of lump them in together a little bit with it being secondary. Let's go to the secondary. Now, this is one where I feel like you don't have to spend bank, to get cornerback too. Now, I will admittedly tell you, I don't think the Broncos will be having a sole cornerback too this year, because I feel like they're going to put their eggs in the Riley Moss basket a little bit, have him be the cornerback too. But it certainly wouldn't hurt to have, that guy, that would be a veteran that they can have in that room. Not the Traymon Smiths of the world, if you will, but Traymon Smith added a lot of value on special teams, but something like a veteran that they can add in that room, maybe to a certain extent, like of what they had with Fabian Moreau, but obviously maybe a little bit of a more experienced and better option. So I think that, it would be wise to certainly add there. He also would be cheap, right? He would be cheap to add to a guy like that room. Then you go to the safety position. PJ Locke, I'm kind of expecting to move on. I'm eyeballing Philadelphia a little bit with his reunion to Christian Parker, obviously, down there. But I got to tell you guys, first and foremost, with it being that safety position, what do we have to do to tug Jeremy Chin's arm and tell him to come reunite with Steve Atwater and have a family reunion in Denver? What do we have to do? One, he probably should have been the Broncos draft pick in that second round, maybe instead of KJ Hamler. But like, what do we got to do to bring Jeremy Chin in the building?
Can I go first?
I don't think. Go ahead.
Make him a good football player. I'm playing. He's just been so inconsistent. Like that's the big thing is again, undefined role, little bit of injury luck in there to kind of take away from his tape. But the thing is he's got to be more consistent. He's just been so inconsistent. I love the name recognition, and I love the pairing him with Steve Atwater there, but he's just a player that if you can get him on a flyer contract, a lower level deal, then that would be something I would be interested in. But he's got to become more consistent at the NFL level, man, for sure. He's been horrible for that Panthers defense, which hasn't been great for a while.
Carl, you were going to say something.
No, I agree. I think he was much better early in his career. His rookie season showed a lot of promise, and he brings something to the Broncos roster they don't have at the safety position, of that downhill, come hit somebody, help in the run game.
Younger Kareem.
Yeah.
If you will.
I'd say, Kareem, he was so up and down. I mean, he was pretty much, I'm going to make the highlight play, or I'm not going to make the play.
Or I'm going to get fined.
And it drove me crazy at times. I mean, I loved Kareem. There's just times where he's a little too selfish in the way that he played the game for me.
Or maybe his highlight play was the fine. I guess that's probably the way to look at it.
Yeah. And, having Jim Leonard here, that's a nice bonus for the Broncos that I think he can work well with these kind of secondary players, and he likes to be aggressive with those guys. So having a Jeremy Chin that can play downhill, I think he could do a pretty good job of helping revitalize some of his career. I still think, just because so many safeties have been cut, I think there's better safeties out there for the Broncos to add to this roster.
Especially current as of today, if you will.
Yeah. So many of them hitting free agency.
The one
you
thing I
think
will
of,
say, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the one thing I will say about Jeremy Chen, and just slight defense of him, because he was so good early in his career. He did have like 3 defensive coordinators in 4 years, and the Panthers are a horrible organization.
Dog poop.
Yeah. So I will say I think I wouldn't mind taking the flyer, but it's another one of those. If you tell me that's your plan, safety, especially with whatever happens with Justin Simmons, which like. I understand why we wouldn't keep him, but please just keep him, please. Then Jeremy Chen, again, I would take him as a reclamation project with Jim Leonard and Vance Joseph, and as a good flyer and depth, but he's not like I wouldn't put him as that's my plan, right? If you tell me like our depth, if we keep Justin Simmons, you tell me our depth is Caden Stearns and Jeremy Chen for cheap, the amount of potential there is insane. Unfortunately, the amount of risk is also kind of high, but that's like a high risk, high reward. But as long as you have Justin Simmons, I feel less worried about the risk. But I do think Jeremy Chen is a flyer that I wouldn't mind taking, but I wouldn't take him and say, you're my safety that I'm going to start.
Right. And I guess right now, my other big question with the Broncos is how much are you trusting your drafting over the last few years? You've drafted quite a few safeties. You talked about it, Caden Stearns. He was looking like a very promising player before his injury.
I'm so upset with his injury. He was so good.
You got DTY, who did not look good when he had to start for the Broncos.
And he's got his ACL injury now too.
And of course, then this last year, drafting JL Skinner. Part of me is kind of like, if you're getting Skinner, like that's his role, is that downhill, come down, hit people. So would that be kind of having 2 of the exact same player on the roster if you go get a Jeremy Chen? I might as well just give JL Skinner a chance to go out there and prove he could be that guy for me. But
good point.
No, I don't mind adding a safety. I'm not going to probably spend a ton of money at the position. An underrated guy, Cameron Curl from Washington.
For a second, I thought you were going to say my name when you said Cameron. I was like, wait, what?
Well, yeah, you get out there. Get that, go talk to Justin Simmons, man. Get your buddy and say, hey, have me lined up next to you. But no, I think he's an underrated player. He's been on a bad team, on a bad defense, but he's actually been a very consistent player. He's one that I think you can get for cheaper than what he's worth. Unfortunately, the NFL's the same way with a lot of people. He was drafted late. And it's hard for those guys to really convince the NFL that they are better than where they were drafted. Those first round guys, they keep getting more and more chances. And people are like, oh, yeah, let's trade this guy. Even though he's not proven anything, we'll give a first round pick for him because he was a first rounder. Like I said, Curl, taken later in the draft, I think you can probably get him for a little bit cheaper. I kind of question again with the secondary cornerback position as well. How much are you going to trust your drafting when you just traded up for Riley Moss this last year because you thought this is going to be our number 2 type guy? Damari Mathis the year before, he was one of the most talked about guys at training camp because everybody's like, dude, this guy, he is going to be something this year. And I loved Damari Mathis. I think he was a bad pairing with Vance Joseph because his game really is get up in the face, press coverage, allow his athleticism to run downfield. And they were playing him in this off coverage, weird 10 yards back. And like every team was just like, all right, you're going to be 10 yards back. We're just going to throw it. And you got to go up there and make the tackle. And that's just not quite his game. He's not a click and close kind of guy. Riley Moss is that kind of guy. He is a click and close. So part of me is like, I wouldn't mind seeing them battle it out and then get a cheap veteran to challenge them. I'm not even sure exactly what veteran. Maybe Chidobe Awuzie.
No, yeah.
He's been very good for
Yeah.
Well,
He's
Colorado.
been very good for Cincinnati and whatever teams he's played with. I think he's been a pretty good, consistent player out there. I wouldn't mind a signing like that.
I mean, I will say if you're going to do a corner that is, if like an official challenge for Riley Moss, Awuzie would fit that bill because like Awuzie is like truly like a solid cornerback too, especially with what got established with the Cincinnati Bengals, which was Nebraska Cornhusker great Cam Taylor-Britt, really solidifying himself as cornerback one, So Carl's smiling.
You had to throw where he came from, right?
I was just about to say, hold on. There's nothing great that's ever come out of Nebraska, Cameron. There's nothing great that's ever come out of Nebraska.
My wife came out of Nebraska. Thanks a lot, bud.
She's awesome, though. She's awesome.
Yeah.
She's awesome because she likes you.
Well, what about you, Lance? Like in terms of like that cornerback position, are you kind of like in that same?
I'm really disappointed in what we didn't get to see out of Riley Moss this last year. Like, quite honestly, I think that's probably the direction you're going to go in. I'm with Carl here. Let Mathis and Riley Moss kind of show it out. I want to go back to the safety position really fast because I don't know if you guys heard this. Ryan and Ben with KOA when they were at the combine sat down with George Payton, and he was talking about how they asked him specifically about PJ Locke and how much would they want him back. And George Payton's like, well, this safety class is going to be really, really good. We would like to have PJ Locke back. But we're he made it very clear they're going to look at the safety position. So that would be the one that I would be the most likely to see them bring a player in. In terms of the cornerbacks, like there's a couple names that really are intriguing to me, but one that I at a Temple a handful of years ago, Rock Yassin. You want to talk about if we're going to play press man coverage and just beat the hell out of players, 28 years old, you're probably going to get him for $6, $7, $8 million a year. With some really good upside. I mean, he's a physical player. He's really fun to watch when he was coming out of the draft. Just really hasn't stuck on anywhere. He played really well for the Colts, was traded, I believe, to the Ravens, and is unrestricted free agent this year. That's a name that I like when I'm looking through this list. That's one that really sticks out in terms of a good fit for what Vance Joseph really wants to do. And I think that when Carl, you were talking about Damari Mathis a little bit. Let's go back to the pass rush. When you're talking with Vance Joseph defense, you want to get pressure, like be aggressive up front and getting pressure, but you also want to play the man coverage on the backside. This last year, they were sending blitzes and couldn't get pressure, which forced Vance Joseph to have to play more zone on the back end. So you're kind of a double-edged sword here. So long story short here, to kind of finalize my point, if you're going to get back to what Vance Joseph actually wants to do, I think Mathis, along with Rock Yassin and Riley Moss, would be a really fun outside cornerback combination opposite of Pat Surtain to see what those guys could actually like. Let the cream rise to the top out of those three guys and just kind of rebuild that room all the way around.
Yeah. What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, Rock Yassin is really interesting. I actually wanted us to draft him at a Temple when he was coming out, and I was kind of upset that we didn't. I think he was drafted by the Colts, wasn't he?
Yeah, yes. Then went to the Raiders and then he went to the
Baltimore.
Raiders.
Yeah, he never really stuck, which was pretty surprising because he was really good at Temple. A guy who's kind of interesting to me if we're looking at maybe some lower, I'm not going to say bottom of the barrel, but like not at the top of the free agency list, but maybe some guy who kind of like provide a little bit of depth and some value. That's interesting to me is Akella Witherspoon, who obviously was a CU buff and kind of bounced around too as well. Like he went to, I think he was at one point he was traded to the Steelers, and then he was like injured all the time there, which kind of sucked. And then ended up with the Rams last year, and he actually was like pretty good for the Rams. He was really consistent. He was kind of like ended up being the guy that opposing quarterbacks were like going after down the field, but he wasn't like, he was still making plays. He wasn't giving up. Like, even though they were targeting him downfield, like trying to take advantage of him, he wasn't breaking. Like, he was still a really good boundary corner and on the snaps that did play in the boundary. I think what was the exact statistic is like you only give up a reception every like 15 snaps or something.
Mhm.
Injury is a concern. Like it was a big part of the reason that he didn't stick around in Pittsburgh. And I don't think he would be super expensive, but he did kind of have a rebound season for the Rams. And I wouldn't be too upset if we signed him. Like he's an interesting player to me that I think we could maybe take a flyer on. Cornerback isn't one of those positions again that I personally would maybe spend a ton of money on. If I'm going to spend a lot of money that we don't have, again, it'd be like the defensive line. But if we're going to take a guy that isn't going to be super expensive but could have an impact, he would be one of them. Chidobe Awuzie is also the other guy that if I was going to make one somewhat splash signing at cornerback, it would probably be him.
I really like the Awuzie idea. I mean, one, obviously there's the Colorado tie, but if you're talking about a guy that is a pure like competition truly for Riley Moss, like it feels like he's that kind of guy that could come in and, you know, because even if he's not, say, your cornerback too, like I mean, like you're talking about a secondary, which is, you know, your top three, right? Like your top three necessarily of, you know, Awuzie, Riley Moss, and Pat Surtain, like, you know, and that's a solid, you know, three corners there, depending on what shapes out with Riley Moss. I think the thing that keeps this a fluid situation with the cornerback position is Riley Moss's situation too, because like he's such an athletic freak, like, and yeah, and obviously we say that term, you know, a lot necessarily, but if you look at Riley Moss at Iowa, I hate to use this comparison because he's the draft prospect this year, but and maybe, you know, Nick can confirm this for me too. I don't know, but like it seemed like he was Cooper DeJean before Cooper DeJean. Like if you look at kind of like what they were doing in Iowa, like he was a playmaker. He was their special team ace at punt return. Like he was almost their do-it-all player before DeJean, you know, kind of like assumed that role. And DeJean is a much better talent, obviously, than Riley Moss, which is, you know, like let's, you know, put the qualifier there. But like I think then Moss has safety. That's the reason why I say that. He has safety, you know, possibilities within his, you know, game. So I'm curious to see if it doesn't work out at corner and he's not cornerback too. Awuzie, I think, is also that insurance policy. Like Awuzie would be that insurance policy that if it doesn't work out, Awuzie can slide in and Moss can be that, you know, guy. And the reason why I think I'm super excited about the possibility of him being a cornerback too is the subtleties, if you will, and the chemistry that could already be there with a guy like a Jim Leonhard, because Jim Leonhard, you know, in his last year, if you will, with Wisconsin, when frankly he should have been the full-time head coach of Wisconsin, was 2022, which happened to be Riley Moss's last year with the Iowa Hawkeyes when he had that tremendous year with the Iowa Hawkeyes. So I can necessarily see him really hitting it off right away with a guy like, you know, a Riley. And so I'm curious to see, you know, his growth necessarily, you know, within that game. Let's go a little bit more now on the offensive side of things. And do you guys want to start with maybe the large elephant in the room, which would what be that a wide receiver room or what they do with Garrett Bowles? Which one you want to which one you want to go with first?
So long as we don't have to talk quarterback, please can we not do that?
We're not going to talk quarterback. We are not going.
God.
Oh, did you think that was
we already know what's going to happen there.
Yeah, that's not the elephant.
Yeah. We already know what's going to happen in the quarterback position, so we don't need to talk about it.
At least we don't think their starting quarterback, we don't think is going to be through free agency. We think it's necessarily probably going to come, at least from my opinion, from the draft. So we don't necessarily need to talk quarterback. We could probably talk, you know, more offensive line, wide receivers, tight ends.
Now that you said that, we're going to sign Sam Darnold.
But
I'm leaving.
Anyway,
I'm leaving this chat
Carl,
right now.
No quarterback.
Carl,
Okay,
I see that.
I am a secret Sam Darnold fan. I love this kid when he was in college. Wanted the Broncos to be able to take him, and I want to not be proven that I was wrong. And I think there's somebody that can save his career. it is Sean Payton. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm holding out that sliver of hope that maybe Sean Payton can save him and save me in the process. That's my hope there. But yeah, no, we can move on to other positions.
Let me ask this question. What position in free agency specifically on offense do you even see the Broncos going after?
Tight end.
Tight end.
Tight end is
for you.
The one position.
Yeah.
Because usually it takes them 2 to 3 years before you really see anything from them.
Mm.
So I can't go into the draft and go, hey, let's go get a rookie and they're going to do great for me. And I can't depend on Greg Dulcich.
Not even Brock Bowers at 12?
No, because
Hear
even
from his
there,
life.
there's, I mean, I do like Brock Bowers, but then obviously if we're doing that, then you're not getting your future quarterback. There's just other positions I would rather the Broncos go and let somebody else take the chance on proving that he is the exception to the rule when it comes to tight ends. You know, they just, like I said, they take a few years before they really show what they are in the league. And the Broncos need an impact player pretty quick from that pick 12 or wherever they're going to be picking. And I like, you know, you talked about how the edge group is not great, but those top 3 guys are pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Broncos aren't going quarterback, I'd love to go edge and get one of the, you know, Latu from UCLA. Why am I spacing on their names right now? All of a sudden, Verse from Florida State. Yeah, Dallas Turner.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of those kind of guys. They could be a real Batman for this team, real game changer for you. You know, cornerback, you know, talked about that a little bit too, adding a true number 2 to this roster. Or offensive tackle if you're moving on from Garrett Bowles. There's just other places I would rather go that I think are better use of that resource than tight end.
Well,
this
you
might
mentioned
actually go ahead.
Okay.
So sorry, Carl. I'm going to disagree with you big time on this one. This year specifically might actually be the one year where I'm not necessarily looking for a true impact player for this team, because I think that they need to actually start the full rebuild. As much as I'd love to see them get a quarterback, specifically JJ McCarthy. And the reason why I'm going to say this is because of this reason. You are not a team that's going to be ready to compete this year, plain and simple. It's just not going to happen. You have too many holes. You don't have enough draft capital to rebuild everything, and you don't have the money to be able to fill all of those holes all at the same time, especially without a quarterback. I would be perfectly fine if the Broncos were not able to get McCarthy as their quarterback. I would be perfectly fine taking a player like a Brock Bowers as a developmental player, because yes, the tight end position does take a couple of years to go and grow. Or a guy like Amarius Mims from Georgia at number 12 overall, incredibly, extremely athletic offensive tackle, a guy that's probably going to take a couple of years, because you're not competing in 2024. You're looking to 2025 and beyond. Like this team is not going to be anything close to what it needs to be this year, because you just don't have the resources you need to have to make it competitive.
I get that. My question there is, again, how much does a tight end truly impact a roster? I mean, you got about 2 or 3 guys in the entire league, and Travis Kelce's starting to decline. So how much more is he going to be that truly impact player for you? Really, he's been about that only guy. I mean, there's been other guys that have kind of risen and fallen throughout the years. Andrews for, you know, Baltimore there for a couple of years, looked like that guy. Ertz for a couple of years. Why am I spacing on the guy with the 49ers right now?
George Kittle.
George Kittle, but he's been injured quite a few times. And so just the tight end positions. Yeah, but again, even there,
Sam Laporta? And that's
how
not
much,
fair,
how much
because
have they
Laporta was a 3rd round pick. So
right, but how much have they really impacted their team compared to going and getting a true number 1 wide receiver, getting a true impact left tackle? Like the number 10 left tackle is making a bigger impact than the number 3 tight end in football right now.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm willing to take a bigger chance on some of those other positions. You know, the number 10 edge rusher is making a bigger impact than the number 3 tight end.
So let's
we can keep going down those positions. So
you start a little bit with the tight end position. Let's take a dive into there. You mentioned the tight end position being being a little bit sneaky, how they can maybe add that big name a little bit alongside a Greg Dulcich versus, say the draft, like a guy like a Theo Johnson. But there's some names that certainly stand out. Obviously, one name that is off the board and was the prize, if you will, of the tight end class, Dalton Schultz. He is off the board, but it was a long shot anyway. The expectation was that he was going to stay with Houston. But there are certainly some names that stand out there. And Brandon, let's go with you. Who are some tight ends that kind of catch your eye a little bit?
Yeah, I'm interested to go look at his projected contract real quick because
you're thinking Jonnu? Is that why you're?
Yep.
Funny enough, he's actually in conversations.
It doesn't have it projected. Yeah, I saw that. He is kind of the guy that I don't really love any of the tight ends in free agency, to be honest. I'm not that. I kind of agree when I'm looking at all of the offensive players that offensive positions we could potentially go after in free agency. Tight end is kind of the only one that sticks out to me as like the place where I think that they could decide that they wanted to go after someone other than maybe center. But I don't really see this team being a huge player on the offensive side of the ball in free agency.
No.
Except for maybe one very specific scenario that could happen, which I guess we'll get into when we get to that position. Jonnu Smith is interesting to me. Like I would maybe take I don't want to say flyer on him because I think he's going to cost a bit more than a flyer, but I think he's a solid tight end that you could use that has the ability in the passing game that is proven to be a reliable pass catcher for his quarterback, and especially if we're going to be drafting a rookie quarterback, which
seems to be the trend.
I think we're going to do. The best thing you can give him is a reliable tight end that he knows he can trust and get the ball to in the intermediate space when he needs to dump it off. In the intermediate space or when he needs to dump it off, and just like trust a guy to be your security blanket to actually catch the pass and know you can trust him. So I wouldn't hate getting someone like him, but I don't really love any of the tight ends that are available. I don't think I would personally try to go after any of them myself, at least. But there's some names. Another guy that's like in that similar vein is like Robert Tonyan, who I forgot was a Bear, actually, to be honest, but he's going to be a free agent. He's another guy who's kind of proven to be that reliable pass catcher. He had a lot of boom games in Green Bay. He just kind of happened to explode there, but he wasn't like the Travis Kelce who's like consistently it's Travis Kelce, but not like the guy that's like consistently being that offensive weapon. But he had some explosions where he just kind of like went off. I think he had like 3 touchdowns in a game or something for them. He's interesting, but I don't really want to chase a tight end. The only position I see them other than center maybe doing something at, if other conditions are met, is maybe wide receiver.
Yeah. So Carl, you touched on that tight end position there a little bit. Then I'll just kind of give you the floor. Then do you see a tight end, maybe unlike what Brandon was saying, do you actually see a tight end that actually kind of falls into that category? Because like one of the recent names that just went on to the board was Logan Thomas, who we all know was the one that was concussed by Kareem Jackson in that game against Washington, which sort of was a trickle effect, if you will, pun intended, Lance, trickle effect.
Trickle down theories, man.
Yeah. So he was like a more recent name and along the lines of Will Dissly. I should say Broncos killer Will Dissly is now on the market.
So a couple names I have in mind. One would be Hunter Henry.
Yeah,
I know that name's not going to move the needle a whole lot, but he's an above average player at about everything you would ask a tight end to do. He's a decent blocker. He's going to get you between 500 to 600 yards from the position. He's good in the red zone for you. You can leave him on the field on all 3 downs. Again, it's not moving the needle, but it at least bumps up the room a little bit. You know, you have a true nut, like this guy can start for us. And if Greg Dulcich happens to stay healthy and can turn into a great receiving option, that's a bonus. You hope that happens. You hope that he can be that true number 1 receiving threat from the tight end position, be your third down threat over the middle. But it gives you at least a decent player in there that you can say, okay, if he's injured, we still have this guy that can be a consistent guy for us. So he would definitely be one. The other that I was thinking about is Gerald Everett.
He's on my radar.
You know, he I think, what was it? He has forced the most missed tackles of any tight end over the last 2 years combined.
Yeah.
And you think about a Sean Payton offense, what does he love to do? Get the ball into the hands of playmakers, let them go make somebody miss, and go make a play down the field. That's Gerald Everett. Like, I think that would be a really good fit with the Sean Payton offense. Not a great blocker. Still needs to work on that. Pretty inconsistent player at times, but the Broncos could do worse. I mean, they've done worse for a lot of years at that position.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't mind, again, taking a little bit of a flyer on him. I'm not saying the Broncos are going to get great just because they go spend a little bit of money at the tight end position.
Right.
But I'm not okay going into this next season with the idea of Greg Dulcich being your number 1 and hoping that he can stay healthy for you.
What about you, Lance?
One thing that hasn't really been brought up is more solid than good, but a lot of upside. 26 years old, former Alabama player, Irv Smith Jr., former Minnesota Viking. Didn't really catch on with the Bengals this last season as well, but there's athleticism there. He's a decent pass catcher, quality blocker, moves pretty well. Just one of those more solid guys would be a quality tight end too, that at least help round out the depth of the floor of this unit right now. But I'm kind of with Brandon on this one. I really don't like this class. Gerald Everett would be fun, but I think that there's some redundancy factor there with Dulcich. Like, you're not putting Gerald Everett lined up in line. You're not putting Greg Dulcich lined up in line. If you want those guys to go out there and block at the point of attack for you, then you're doing it wrong, having both of those players on the same team. I understand, like, the multiplicity of putting those 2 players out there in this. Let's go double wing right slot and put Marvin Mims over the top of them and run a deep over a post and a go route right next to each other. Just put the defense in conflict with, holy shit, here's a bunch of speed. Like, you could do that, but in terms of like building out a well-rounded offense, I don't know that you're going to do that with a guy like Gerald Everett. I think that Irv Smith Jr. would at least bring some blocking prowess to this team. And maybe are they going to re-sign Manhertz? Is that a potential possibility there?
I thought it was a 2-year deal for him.
Was it a 2-year deal? I couldn't remember if it was a 2-year deal or not.
Yeah.
Regardless, I don't know. This free agent class to me is not something that I want to dive into for the Broncos at tight end position. It's just not a very good group.
Irv Smith is the name that I am also kind of looking at too. It's more like top heavy in the sense of like 2 or 3 guys, and then after, and the rest of it is just more like just kind of some guys, if you will. Or more like darts is the wrong word, but just guys that can you really trust them necessarily? But the Gerald Everett is certainly one that I'm, certainly looking at. The Irv Smith, I like the idea of Irv Smith in the sense of like you could do something combination wise of Irv Smith and Manhertz while Dulcich is out wide, if you will. But there's also the wild card in the room. Like, actually, I should say currently in the room, and that's not Greg Dulcich. That would be a guy by the name of Lucas Kroll. I think that Lucas Kroll maybe is a name that, if you're talking developing a guy, maybe the Broncos feel like it's more beneficial to develop a guy like that, like a Lucas Kroll within that room, who kind of flashed a little bit, right? Near the end of that season. So, but I feel like if you're going to go into that room, Everett and some of those guys,
You want to talk about the sleeper guy who's already there, Adam Chapman.
No, he's a free agent, so he's got to
Yeah,
be re-signed if you want him. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody said Noah Fant.
No, we didn't say no fan. No, I know we didn't re-sign him, but I think he was been solid. Like when I say he's already there, he's familiar with this team and he's
Right.
Yeah, in the room.
in the room. I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hate it. I think he's a decent depth tight end.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think he's fine.
I would give him a non-guaranteed contract.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
You know,
don't pay
I
him
think
much.
I wouldn't mind giving a couple different guys some non-guaranteed contracts and just saying, hey, we're going to have a little battle at the tight end position, see who can emerge. You know, I'm bringing in Everett only if I think Greg Dulcich is not the part of the future. You know,
I'm not a
that's probably
massive
the only
Gerald
reason
Everett fan.
I'm willing to do that. That's why, again, I'd probably go with like a Hunter Henry, who's a little bit more well-rounded, maybe not as great of a receiving option, but can be an inline tight end when you need him to be, can get out there in the slot if you need him to move out there. You know, there's a lot more versatility what you could do with the offense with him on the field. So
Yeah.
Again, it's not moving the needle for the team, but it's upping that room just a little bit.
So we obviously have just a few more positions left. There's a couple we won't touch, obviously, because it seems like the guard position is solidified, obviously, with Quinn Miners, who they probably will be signing to an extension here, you know, rather soon, along with PS2. Of course, you know, the fullback position, it certainly seems like they'll bring back Michael Burton, right? It seems like they'll bring back Michael Burton. It seems pretty safe to assume that one. And obviously, we're not going to touch the quarterbacks. We're not going to touch the quarterback. And we're not going to have a Mike McGlinchey discourse at right tackle. But the right tackle position seems to be, you know, a little bit of a solidified thing there. He is a restructure contract candidate, if you will. So you can look at that. But so let's take a look at the center position. Let's go to the center of the conversation, at least for right now. There was so the one thing I will phrase on this one is, does some of the names now, like a Mitch Morse, who was recently released by the Buffalo Bills, you know, does it intrigue you in a way of possibly adding to that room and maybe having him start? Or do we feel truly confident with where things are at that it's more than likely going to end up being Alex Forsythe? Because that's kind of like where I'm leaning toward. So I'm trying not hard to look too much into the center position, even though that there are some decent names in there, like a former familiar name like Connor McGovern. But do you guys see a scenario where they can add, you know, to that room a little bit like a vet?
I think you can add somebody. You're probably not adding a guy that you're viewing as a starter. You're probably viewing him more as that true center guard rotation guy. Kind of like with the cornerback position and the safety position where we talked about.
Right.
You've just drafted a lot of people for this position. At some point, you've got to trust some of your rookies to step up and actually become starters for you. Now, I know from people I've talked to, they really do like Forsythe a lot.
Yeah.
Wattenberg is another one that they really do like, either as a rotation guy or as a starter. He held his own when he went in this past season.
He definitely got better.
So I think they're probably going to lean into that and just say, hey, this is an area that we need to save some money. We already put a lot of money into this offensive line. We're going to have to pay Quinn Miners here pretty soon. We can't have 5 guys that we're paying huge money to and really hurt the rest of the roster because the offensive line's taken up everything. So I think they'll lean into that. Like I said, some kind of veteran. Does sound like, is it Bailey?
Quinn Bailey's back.
It sounds like he's going to be coming back.
Yeah.
So he's a decent guy. Like I said, a rotation, backup, swing kind of interior guy. I think they're going to be okay at that position. And then, of course, Palchevsky is another one I think they really do like as a rotation swing tackle, possibly getting that chance to start if you can move on from McGlinchey here pretty soon.
Or even Bowles
this year.
Or even Bowles, depending on what they do. But yeah, and we don't have to spend too much time on the center position because I feel like the 4 of us have an idea of like where they're going to go, which is the Forsythe.
The only reason I mentioned that is like the one position I saw maybe they could make a move there is just to bring in some competition for Forsythe because there is a decent amount of like especially last year. Last year, I was like really surprised we didn't bring in a center because there were a lot of center contracts going out there that were pretty cheap for good centers. But yeah, the only reason I brought that up is like a potential position where I could see them actually going after someone is to bring in some competition and versatility. But yeah, I don't. Even though I say that, I don't think they will. Like, I don't think we're actually going to do anything there.
Do you agree, Lance? You in that same boat?
I'm with you guys on that one. I don't think they're really going to do anything. I think it's going to be Forsyth and Wattenberg kind of duking it out. But if you want to, just a couple names that would be intriguing to maybe take a look at. Matt Hennessy, formerly Atlanta Falcon guy, really didn't take off. I know the Broncos were interested in him in, I think it was 2019 when he was drafted, when they actually drafted Lloyd Cushenberry. So fun story about this. This is source information here, courtesy of Eric, but the Broncos were actually trying to, they were going to draft Matt Hennessy when they drafted Lloyd Cushenberry, but the Falcons, if you remember, traded up in front of the Broncos because they knew they liked Hennessy to take him, and the Broncos ended up, I believe, trading back and then picking Lloyd Cushenberry later in that draft. Like that, so there's a tie there. It's a few years old now, but younger player, still some upside, going to be kind of cheap because he's kind of fallen out of grace from the Falcons. And then another guy that I really like as a developmental guy could come in and be a veteran in the room with some starting experience, Nick Allegretti from the Chiefs. He fits very well with what the Broncos want to do. He can move pretty well, quality pass protector. So if you're looking for a guy that's going to be cheaper, veteran experience that can come in and just kind of help these young guys learn a little bit, maybe do, like Carl said, a non-guaranteed contract, vet minimum, something like that. Allegretti and Matt Hennessy are the two players that I'd be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, that would be kind of interesting. You know, I was actually just kind of like scrolling through. This actually kind of surprised me a little bit. Do you guys have any idea what Spot Track has Cushenberry's market value at? I was
$8 million.
$8 million. It's $8 million. Like, as
really?
far as, yeah,
I just
like
looked at it. I cheated. I literally just looked at it 20 seconds ago before you did that.
I was really surprised by that because I mean the expectation is he's going to get somewhere between, 12 and 14. So yeah, I would, if it's $8 million, I'm at least having a conversation internally about the idea of bringing him back. If it's in fact, true, like
if it's $8 million.
I would be.
I mean, I would do it, but that seems really low.
Yeah. So I was pretty surprised about that. So I think that kind of leaves us with the left tackle position, but we're kind of left with a caveat because it's like Bowles is still on the roster, right? Like Garrett Bowles is still on the roster, so it kind of feels like where are the Broncos going to go with this? Because it's like Garrett Bowles. It feels like. Bowles feels like a guy that he's been 1 foot in, 1 foot out lately, or maybe even sometimes maybe 2 feet out at times, with the Denver Broncos. And I mean, it seems like they've wanted him to restructure or even, do some things, with his contract. He's been, less than, less in terms of like wanting to do any of that, acquiesce in the request. And so it seems like his days are numbered a little bit, whether that is on just this year alone or just a simple fact that, you're talking about a situation where they do have to go out and maybe draft the tackle. And I think that there's I'm not saying like I randomly decided to share today, they're going to go trade him to like Tennessee Titans for like pick number 38 or something like that. I'm not saying that. But I think that, it's a fascinating one to me because I think one area where I think they could do it as far as, again, not to say Band-Aid, but I just feel like if you trade him, re-sign Cameron Fleming, and maybe even regardless, re-sign Cameron Fleming, to the room, and then you look to the draft, you draft that replacement for Garrett Bowles. So the reason why I'm kind of like lukewarm on talking about the left tackle position is just simply because Garrett Bowles is still a member of the Denver Broncos.
He should be.
Yeah.
He should be. Going back to something I talked about a little bit ago, and not to really come at Carl, but there's too many holes on this roster right now. And you've got a player, and this is probably well known to everybody listening to the show. If you know anything about Lance Sanderson, you know that he is probably the biggest Garrett Bowles honk on the planet. Like, I love this dude like he's my brother, seriously. For real, though, like, this dude caught so much grief, and obviously the holding penalties early in his career really, like, everyone wants to continue to go back to that. He's had 4, 3, 3, and 4 holding penalties. So what, 10 or 13, something like that, over the last 4 seasons. It's really not that big of a deal, guys. He's improved that dramatically. He's a top 10 left tackle in the league, guaranteed, if not top 7. And you could probably argue top 5 if you really wanted to go into and breaking down his tape.
Before he had that leg injury, top 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like, you're talking about a team, again, that has so many holes and limited capital, limited resources to go and fill them. And you're going to move on from a guy. Yeah, he's 32 years old and he's probably going to be on the downturn of his career. You got him at least on another year, restructure that, give him an extension, lower that cap hit down a little bit. You can still save $12 million. I did an article at milehighhuddle.com about this a little over a month ago, breaking down how you could restructure Garrett Bowles' contract to have him be like a $4 million cap hit this year. So you also have the cost to replace him. What is that cost going to be in terms of the money? Sure, if you cut him right now, you save $16 million. Well, that $16 million, you're eating up at least 4, maybe 5, if not $6 million on a rookie deal, plus having to bring in a free agent like a Cam Fleming. So really, what are you actually saving by moving on from Garrett Bowles? And you're making your roster worse. He should be a Denver Bronco next year. Absolutely should be.
Yeah.
So I guess my only pushback against this a little bit, a couple things. Like you said, a little bit older guy. So you said earlier, this team is not going to be competing this next year.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to continue to pay this guy big money when you could be using that money on some younger prospects that could actually be a true part of your future here 2-3 years down the road? Second part of this, man, where was I going to go with that? Oh, second part of this. Sorry. How much does Garrett Bowles actually want to be here is the other part.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about getting a restructure done.
Right.
From things I've heard, he's been pushing back against that and saying, no, I don't want to do this. You know, if you want to do that, then
a couple times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. They've come to him a few times throughout the years to try to get this done. And he keeps saying, no, my contract is my contract. And yeah, so Randy coming in with that same thought. So that's my big thing is if he's going to say, I want to be here at this level, then I'm saying, hey, you're one of the few pieces that actually teams are going to be willing to trade for. And we could probably get a day 2 pick for you. And we're missing some of these kind of picks.
It'd be great.
Yeah. You know, and so if that happens, I don't want him gone. But again, if he's not willing to restructure, then I'm saying you've kind of made it where it's impossible for you to stay. And there's some okay left tackles hitting the market. One that really sticks out, Andrews Pete. You know, obviously this guy played for Sean Payton. He knows him, drafted him in the first round. So he likes him. He's not going to cost a ton to come here to Denver. He's an okay left tackle. I thought he actually did better at tackle this last year than he's done at guard before. You know, that's what he came into the league as. He was supposed to be a tackle, but they were great at tackle. So they're like, oh, let's just try you inside. And he was okay at it. He just wasn't great at it. So he's a guy I'd be willing to take a little bit of a shot at for a 1 to 2 year kind of contract. And like I said, you can trade Bowles, get that over $10 million savings, bring in Andres Pete for $5 million, $6 million kind of dollar deal. And you've got a little bit of saving at the position. It's a bad case scenario. Again, I want Garrett Bowles here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want him here with the understanding of we've got to rework some of these deals to make our cap situation work to build a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's why, like, I feel like the only, I hate to use the term, it's a PTSD term for Broncos country. But like, you know, the Band-Aid. I feel like the alternative here would be you trade Bowles, you get the day 2 pick possibly, you re-sign Cam Fleming, but you draft your tackle. Like you draft your tackle in free agency, but obviously it's a crapshoot. It's a crapshoot at that point because you don't know if the tackle that you fall in love with or that you think is going to be available is going to be there. So it's a crapshoot at that point. But that's kind of like the scenario that I'm going with, and I honestly don't know if Mulls will be here, long term. But moving forward, that kind of leaves us with maybe the two other options, if you will, and it looks like David Talks Broncos chimed in with Becton actually just now before we jump into our final ones. You guys okay with Becton? Or are you kind of like a little
his injuries, and
he's kind of had some off-field stuff a little bit too, hasn't he?
Yeah, and just work ethic has been questioned a lot. There's just so many red flags with that guy. I think I would probably stay away from him. I mean, he's a talent. Don't get me wrong. I mean, big, strong, can move for his size.
Run blocker, yeah.
But again, if you're not willing to put in the work, that's my main thing is, like, if you want to change this culture, you got to get guys who are willing to put in the extra effort. And going and getting a guy that's not going to do that, I think hurts what you're trying to build.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so let's blend both here together. We'll do wide receiver and running back. Both the wide receiver class and the running back class is fascinating. And let me just preface this by saying, for the running back class, the four of us have had this conversation either off record or on these episodes before. We're not totally, fine, if you will, paying a running back, maybe top dollar money or anything like that. Now, but the reason why I preface it this way is because I'm putting myself into the shoes of Mr. Payton, Mr. George Payton, and of course, Sean Payton. And that is they've kind of prioritized the running back position maybe a little bit more than the next person. So looking at the running back position, let's start there. It is a very deep class. And actually, it's a deep class that also has value with some certain players. So I don't know about you guys, but this does feel like a situation where the Broncos could go forward with and address that running back position. And we should preface it this way. Javonte Williams is the end of his rookie contract. Samaje Perine is on the end of his deal for his final year. And can Jaleel McLaughlin be that guy to assume that workload? I don't know. I really don't know. So what do they do? What are some options? And we'll start with you, Lance.
You sit on the running back position for this year and draft Amani Bailey out of TCU in the 6th round. Like, that's the guy that I want. No, for real. I don't know, man. This running back class has a lot of name recognition. Like, obviously, you're going to get the top guys that obviously Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler. Nyheim Hines is an intriguing name who was just released. He's a street free agent from the Bills. That would be a name that I would be very interested in adding into this room, to tell you the truth, because you're talking one of the better receiving threats out of the backfield in general at the NFL level. He's a quality punt returner as well. If you're looking for that upgrade, and this sounds mean because I like Jaleel McLaughlin a lot, but Nyheim Hines is simply a better player. He's a little bit older. You can get him at a value deal if you really wanted to. But if you're looking for a player that you can work out of the backfield, a quality third down back, a quality pass protector, Hines would be probably at the top of my list. But I don't think that the Broncos are going to go anything with the running back room in free agency in general. So that, I don't know. I know I went in a couple different directions there, but at the same time, like, we're having a hypothetical conversation that I don't think is even one that's necessary, because I think they're going to stick pat with what they have right now.
Carl?
Yeah, I mean, a guy like Devin Singletary.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind. I mean, he's a good all-around back. You saw Houston last year when he came in finally as their starter. That offense really took off. And they didn't have a great offensive line. They had a lot of injuries at that position. So he didn't have great blocking in front of him. Here in Denver, they'd have really good run blocking for him. And I think he could be a pretty darn good back for you. I'm kind of with Lance. You're probably going to stick with what you got. Maybe you're going to bring in a late round pick undrafted guy to kind of compete and hope that one of them emerges into something for you. You're going to hope that Javonte can get back to looking more like what he did his rookie season and breaking tackles. And hopefully he's gotten a little bit better vision than what he had before. Vision, unfortunately, it's one of those things you either have it or you don't. Mm-hmm. And he just doesn't have it. Samaje Perine, he's a really good number 2. Like, if I ever built a number 2 running back, it'd probably look exactly like Samaje Perine. He can run the football. He can catch the football. He's great on third down if you need him to stay in there and block for you. Like, he's just kind of a do-it-all kind of guy. So I don't mind him sticking around here in Denver for this next year. And McLaughlin, he had some spectacular plays.
Yeah.
He's just got to learn to be consistent and trusted. And I don't know if they're quite there yet to trust this guy to be their true number 3 guy.
Yeah. What about you, Brandon? Because, I mean, this is something you and I have talked a little bit about it. Yeah.
I'm 100% all the way out on any running back in free agency this year. Nyheim Hines is interesting. Like, I wouldn't, if we were going to make one move at running back, which I'm vehemently against in free agency in general, and it was Nyheim Hines, I wouldn't hate it because he's basically a wide receiver out of the backfield. We know how much Sean Payton loves that. Mm-hmm. I talked before about with the tight ends how valuable it is to have some kind of a safety blanket for a rookie quarterback that's going to come in and have someone he can get the ball to and trust. And I think Nyheim Hines has proven he can do that. He was injured and missed all of last season, which is going to make him cheaper, but also for good reason because there is some risk there. I'm totally out on any free agent running back. Just draft one. I think we should draft one. There's a few guys. I don't even have a specific one that I love. I think there's a decent amount of running backs in this class you can take, and just take one.
Let me
don't sign one. That's my opinion.
The reason why I prefaced it in the beginning is because it's not necessarily what I think I would want to do in the sense of.
Well, I also don't think we will. That's the other part.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. See, I just feel like it's such a deep class. I can see them being, because we're also talking about a position that is also easily replaced in terms of production. Of course, easily replaced either through the draft or possibly who you can sign with free agency. And one of the reasons why I preface this is I see a scenario where it's gonna really piss Broncos country off. But I could see a scenario where Javonte Williams is a surprise cut this year. But the reason why I preface that in saying that is because you do have the guys of a Josh Jacobs on the market. You do have a guys like a DeAndre Swift on the market. If they go out and they are, if you will, somewhat aggressive, if you will, not signing them to those $10 million a year contracts, they go out and they sign a Josh Jacobs, they go sign a DeAndre Swift. You're talking about a scenario where you're putting Javonte Williams on the block almost immediately. It would add a lot of value to the room, at least to what Sean Payton would be looking for. But I just think that they'll be a little bit aggressive. So I think if we were to say who could be a splash name out of free agency, not splash deal, but a splash name, I feel like it could come from that running back position in free agency. I will say in terms of value, I tweeted it a few days ago. One name I am kind of keeping a particular eye on in terms of value is a guy like Antonio Gibson from Washington. A guy who came out of Memphis. The guy was a wide receiver. A guy was a wide receiver and running back. The unfortunate thing there is injury concerns and that fumble bug. He's got that fumble bug, with Washington, but he's an electric player. And actually you give Sean Payton the ability to work with someone like that between the tackles, maybe use him as a wide receiver, especially not to the extent of, because Christian McCaffrey, but there's certain ways where you could utilize him, Antonio Gibson, that are creative enough. You could put him out wide. You could put him, in certain packages along, maybe with the Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine. So there's a lot more creative ways in how you could use a guy like an Antonio Gibson. So he's really kind of like a guy as far as a value that I'm really kind of eyeballing, which is kind of the same ways to transition a little bit to the wide receiver room. Because the wide receiver room, if the rumors are true of what we heard in the last 24 hours, that they are going to not just move on from Cortland, but they're going to move on from Jerry Jeudy, what is that room going to look like, right? What is that room going to look like? You're talking about a room that is maybe not maybe lacking truly a wide receiver one, if not already. So what would they do there? Like you're talking about a scenario where they were to kind of come full circle, double dipping on that defensive line. They could double dip a little bit on that wide receiver market in free agency and also draft a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Carl. Go ahead, because I want to think about this just a second.
Okay. I think if you're going to move on from those kind of guys like a Tim Patrick, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, I'm not exactly wanting to go then spend money when I hope I learned from that mistake of I paid decent money for these guys that hadn't actually produced great numbers. I mean, they were decent numbers. Tim Patrick had a decent season. Cortland Sutton had one really good season. Jerry Jeudy's been okay, right there at the 900, 800 kind of mark. Yeah. But then to go sign somebody to a decent contract that hasn't produced at that kind of level, I would probably be saying, no, I'm not taking that chance. You know,
especially the wide receiver.
You got, right. Yeah. You got a great wide receiver class in this draft. I know this name. Some people are going to really push back against this. You know, maybe you take a chance on a Michael Thomas. Obviously, he has worked well. You know, he's worked well with Sean Payton. He knows that system. That's where he has thrived. At one point, he was thought of as a top 3-5 wide receiver in football with Sean Payton as his coach. Yeah. You know, he's 31, hasn't played much the last 3 years, so he's not going to cost an arm and a leg. And I thought last year he did okay when he finally decided to play. Probably if he'd played the entire season, would have had another close to 1,000-yard season. And so I think there's still a little bit left in the tank. Like I said, 1-year deal, 2-year deal. It's just not going to cost you much. And just see if you can get anything out of the guy.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you some more time, Lance. I'll give you some more time to think a little bit. But
I have some names if you want to.
Go ahead, Brandon.
So there's two. Michael Thomas is one of the ones I was going to say. Wide receiver is the position I could see us. I agree with what Carl said about not wanting to make that same mistake, but I do personally think, especially with this latest buzz of they're both being gone, and Tim Patrick is also a fairly obvious cap casualty, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
They could all three of them be gone. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I think we would probably be somewhat aggressive in free agency and in the draft. Like in free agency, Michael Thomas is one of those guys. To me, a guy like Tyler Boyd from the Bengals is someone I would 100% bring in. What's that?
He's been linked. I think Cliff mentioned
linked. Yeah. He's just so consistent. He's kind of been almost like somewhat forgotten. He's kind of been Cincinnati's Tim Patrick. He's more known than Tim Patrick, but he's like just so consistent. He doesn't really drop passes. He's a bit underrated. Tyler Boyd's a great wide receiver. And then the draft is just stocked with him. A guy I really like that I think is kind of underrated. And especially if we're talking about Cortland Sutton potentially being gone, which makes me really sad, but you want a guy that can maybe replace Cortland Sutton. Jalen Polk from Washington reminds me of Cortland Sutton. That guy is so just aggressive. He wants the football. He's going to go after the football. He's going to tank the football. He's going to make the contested catches. You want a guy to go get those 50-50 balls? Jalen Polk. And, Michael Penix is could be another. Get the Michael Penix, Jalen Polk combo going again. But even if I like Michael Penix, but I'm more in the JJ McCarthy camp. But I would say I do really like Jalen Polk, and I think he's kind of slept on. I don't really see him mentioned as much as I feel like he should be. And he's one dude. There's like so many other great wide receivers in this class. I think we would probably do both, though. I think we're going to sign one, and I think we're going to draft one. We could sign Tyler Boyd and Michael Thomas and draft one. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Lance, you kind of have something to think about this.
All right. So I've got A couple things. One, Michael Thomas here makes a ton of sense. I think it really does, because there's your veteran guy that comes in with the incredibly high upside. I know 31 years old, a bunch of injuries, but again, the experience with the system, that just makes too much sense. In fact, I thought the Broncos were going to trade for Michael Thomas before the season just to get him here and in the room, especially after Tim Patrick went out.
Yeah.
That's the name that I have my eye on the most, though. Tim Patrick. What exactly happens with him? I don't disagree with Brandon here. I think that he is a very obvious cap casualty. I mean, it's what, the $15 million cap hit this year with an $11 million base salary. You've got to lower that number. But I don't think he's gone. I think that if there's one player that is back out of the three that the Broncos have on the roster right now, I think that Tim Patrick is probably that guy. They had a huge role planned for him, apparently, according to multiple different people coming out of Dove Valley. Tim Patrick was supposed to be the dude for this
Michael Thomas role.
Exactly. Like, so there you go. I think that Patrick is probably brought back, but
you think his 2 season-ending injuries suffered in practice don't hinder him a little bit there?
Sure, it can, and he's had another torn ACL in his and like I said, this is probably one of those. He's not going to be the reliable option, but let's bring back a guy that's familiar with the room, a leader in the locker room, very well respected in Dove Valley, and a guy that again is like Tyler Boyd. Very reliable, doesn't drop a lot of passes. When he's out there, he's one of your better receivers on this roster right now. And again, 31 years old. But if you're looking for a receiver to come in and learn behind those guys, obviously Marvin Mims, they spoke at length about him at the combine and about the misuse of him because him and Jerry play the same position. So there's your cue. Jerry Jeudy's gone. A guy that I love in this draft class in terms of a bigger body, high athletic, high competitive guy, Javon Baker, dude, the kid out of UCF. That kid is a freaking stud, man. And there you go. There's your 4th round pick for the Broncos, a guy that's going to go out there, just be a fiery competitor. He's a former Alabama player that transferred to UCF to get an opportunity because he was stuck behind the likes of, I believe he was behind Jalen Waddle and Henry Ruggs and like all those guys went to UCF to transfer just to get an opportunity to play, and then became one of the bigger sleeper wide receivers in this class, man. I love his fit for this Broncos offense moving forward, and I think that would be a really good room to round out. And let's not forget, guys, we have Brandon Johnson, who I think is a quality player. He's a quality, at least number 4 wide receiver. And then Jalen Virgil, man. There's some more speed you could add to the room, too. He's coming off of that torn was it a torn ACL, I think is what he had in training camp. And it sounds like he's going to be ready to go for training camp this year. So you don't necessarily need to make the wide receiver room a huge priority because you got some guys that you can come with. And the receiver class this year, again, is super stacked. So maybe going out and making a big time priority free agent signing isn't going to be the best move. I can see Thomas, but I mean, let's see what these young guys can do.
If we keep Tim Patrick, I do think there's definitely less that is done. And I wouldn't hate it. Like, if you can lower that cap number, I love Tim Patrick. I just think with the injuries and the cap hit, I think he's gone. But I would love it if he stayed.
The flexibility and the fluid situation that I have with this wide receiver room is I think it also gives the flexibility for the Broncos to at least have some decency to maybe have the conversation with Tim Patrick to maybe see how the draft goes, but know the fact that maybe like a handshake agreement, knowing the fact that you probably will be a Bronco, but let's talk after the draft kind of deal. Knowing the fact he probably is not going to maybe sign with anybody else, but like a handshake agreement that the Broncos will have with him. The reason why I say that is because in this draft specifically, and we're having obviously a draft conversation a little bit, but like it's hard to ignore. Like the wide receiver draft class is really hard to ignore. The reason why I say that is because there are Cortland Sutton replacements and Tim Patrick replacements in this draft.
Javon Baker.
Brendan Rice, right? Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's kid is certainly, if there was ever a Tim Patrick, you mentioned Javon Baker, but if there was ever a guy who kind of compares quite favorably to like a guy like a Tim Patrick, Brendan Rice would certainly fit that bill a little bit. Another guy that maybe you could say maybe a Cortland Sutton a little bit, but is a freaky wide receiver and a chiseled wide receiver, that would be South Carolina's Xavier Legette. Now, granted, it's 1 year, like it was one like successful year But if Trey Palmer taught us one thing, you can actually be successful with 1 year and actually, perform rather well in your first year as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Another guy, since Lance is in the building, would be Isaiah Nair. Oh, wait, he transferred to Nebraska too. So anyway, no, I digress. But no, as far as the free agency pool, a little bit, it's curious. I mean, he's going to cost a lot of money, and I actually feel like if you're going to replace Jerry Jeudy, that's the reason why I kind of talk about the draft a little bit there. If you're going to replace Courtland Sutton or Tim Patrick, the draft is probably where I would do it there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to do it in free agency, I feel like free agency probably is your way of replacing a guy like a Jerry Jeudy. And obviously, he's going to cost a pretty penny. But I love the idea of a Calvin Ridley in Sean Payton's offense. He is going to cost, if you're going to talk like a dream guy, like as far as, like those free agents, like Calvin Ridley fits that kind of mold. But I've been kind of pumping this guy's table for the Broncos as far as in this whole theme of Sean Payton this year, whether it's been quarterbacks or anything else, reclamation projects. And we just mentioned about a Colorado reunion earlier in the secondary. Laviska Shenault, man, I think that Laviska Shenault would be a really fascinating one to work with. I mean, here's a guy who he was with Jacksonville. He kind of got into that whole Urban Meyer crap that was down there with Jacksonville. He did get injured. He did go to Carolina.
Talk about a horrible start to your career, going to Jacksonville in that Urban Meyer situation, and then going to Carolina.
Carolina, and obviously dealing with, of course, again, the Dave Tepper, the Panthers organization. So getting your hands on a guy like Viska, who's 25 years old, not yet 26 years old, you could get your hands on him a little bit, mold him a little bit into that Deebo Samuel role. Necessarily on how you want to use him. I like the idea of a reclamation project like that to get your hands on him a little bit. But also, I do like the idea of having Michael Thomas in the building because, here's the thing: is of all the people that he has brought in, the Traquan Smiths, who was the other guy that he
Little Jordan Humphrey.
No, there was another guy that it was Traquan Smith, but it was a guy who didn't work out. Marquez Callaway. Callaway was the other guy, right? Callaway's the other guy. If you're going to talk about a true Saints wide receiver who understands exactly what Sean Payton is asking for, it's Michael Thomas, 1,000%. The injuries can certainly scare you. I'm turned off by him necessarily, but if you're going to have a wide receiver in the building that's going to teach that room, a young room possibly, Michael Thomas would be that guy that fits that mold.
Yep.
The other thing I would add here, I don't think for a Sean Payton offense to function well that you need elite wide receivers to make it work because his system is set up to get guys open.
Right.
So his entire time with the Saints, he focused so much more on building the offensive line than he ever did his wide receiver core.
Mm-hmm.
Usually he had one really good receiver and then a bunch of just kind of role players. I think of while he was there with the Saints, Brandon Cooks is one wide receiver that he took in the first round. But, that was a guy that he had a vision of how I'm going to use this kind of speed when it comes to seeing it on the field. Robert Meacham was the other guy, his second year in the league that he drafted. Well, that wasn't a first round pick though.
No, but he was
I'm talking early round picks. Michael Thomas was a second round pick. Those are the only three receivers that he took in the first or second round while he was there with the Saints. So I think he's one of those guys. He can go find receivers and sit there and say, hey, I know how to use you. I know this is what you can do on the field. And when he was talking about Marvin Mims, when he said it was our coach's fault for not using him right.
And it's his fault.
I think that's what he's trying to say is, hey, we had a vision of how we were going to use him, and then we didn't use him that way. And part of that was, he had the same role as Jerry Jeudy. And so you had to get Jerry Jeudy on the field. but there I think you can see, hey, he's got a vision for how he wants to play this player. So I don't think you have to go, like I said, a first round pick to really make this offense go. You can go with you took my guy, Javon Baker. Come on. Love that guy.
That screams Malachi Corley in the 4th round.
Yeah.
He's not going to last that long, unfortunately. Damn it.
Not going to last that long, but I'm trying to speak it into existence, Lance. Please, just agree with me. Say it with me.
You know, I was listening to somebody the other day, and they said there's a statistic that they've seen proven over and over again when it comes to wide receivers that if they are high on this in college, usually they're pretty successful in NFL, and it's yards per route run. You know, like it shows, hey, they're consistently productive on a per play basis. And Javon Baker was top 5 this past year. And the other guys are going in the 1st round.
Yeah.
So that's why I think he would be a really good fit, because Sean Payton is one of those guys. Again, get the ball into somebody's hand, let them go make a play. Baker's that kind of guy.
Absolutely. Now, as we round out, obviously we went a little bit long, but to round out the entire show, obviously I said we would probably maybe do a predictions like for every single position. We went a little bit long, but I'll tell you, this was quite the deep dive. I loved it. And how we were able to do this, especially before free agency. But like if we were to actually instead give one prediction, like just call it like one prediction that we feel will happen, that the Broncos will sign in free agency, who do you think it will be? And I see Brandon with his head down and he's muted. We'll roll with him first since he's not exactly ready just yet.
I hate you so much. I had to reply to a text from my mom because I have the house sit for her while she's coming back from Arizona. Please repeat the question.
So I basically said, predict one move that the Broncos will have in free agency.
Does it have to be another player? Like, does that have to be like a free agent that we sign, or can it be that we like release someone or trade someone?
No, a signing. A signing.
All right.
Randy says Reader.
That's definitely a possibility. I'm gonna steal low-hanging fruit because it's Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas, like I just can't picture a world where that doesn't happen. Like, tell me I'm wrong. But no, I do think we probably bring in someone on the defensive line. I'm not going to go with DJ Reader. I'm going to go with, even though he's my guy and I know he's going to be expensive, I'm going to go with Tier Tart.
Okay. Okay. All right. Carl, we'll go with you, man. What do you say?
I'm going to say Andrew Van Ginkel from Miami. Added to that edge group. I think if the Broncos are going quarterback early in this draft, they got to get another edge guy that can actually be a true 3-down guy. And I just feel like he's one of those underrated players that would thrive well in this kind of system. So I guess I'll go that direction. He won't be too expensive. He'll still cost a little bit. Okay. But I think he's worth paying for.
Lance.
I've been digging through this one particular page trying to find the one name that I think is actually going to be signed here, but I'm not finding one that like legitimately stands. Oh man, that would be so much fun if they could get it done. Oh, I just found the name that I'm in love with.
Let's go with the hint. What's the position group?
It's a safety group. I brought it up earlier. I think that obviously with Justin Simmons potentially being on the way out or his deal being redone, PJ Locke's a free agent, Caden Stearns is an injury concern. George Paton said it at the combine. Like, this is an intriguing safety class. And a guy that I am absolutely in love with from the Chargers is Alohi Gilman. Man, you want to talk about a ball of fire. He runs around with his afro sticking out from underneath his helmet. He flies all over the field. He's good in coverage. He comes downhill. He hits really hard. If I could have my one safety player that comes in and fills up a role for this Broncos defense, Alohi Gilman, please become a Denver Bronco and only make about $4.5 million a season, because that would be a hell of a fit for Vance Joseph's defense too.
So you're gonna say Gilman for your prediction? You're gonna
Give it to me, please.
give it to me. So the hardest thing and Rennie said a reader. It's so hard for me on that one because like it's such a deep room there on that free agency thing. It's like I just don't know. It's hard for me to like predict a guy from there because like it could go a million different directions. I feel even that way with
That's
the
why I
running
just went
back.
with my guy. Like if I had to say they're signing someone, they're signing a defensive lineman. I just picked my guy. But
Well, it's kind of like how we went with it. Like they're probably going to double dip on the defensive line, but even in the questions, like what are they going to go with? Especially, and when I say defensive line, I'm kind of saying like the defensive tackles, and as far as like the edge, I hate to kind of go to the same theme of what Carl's talking about, but I mentioned his name earlier in the show. But I'm going to go with Zach Bond. I'm going to go with Zach Bond. I think that Zach Bond, he's actually rather reliable in a sense. Like you can actually trust what he can do. He's consistent. He's not great. He's more on the good side, if you will, but he's reliable. I think that's probably the best way to say it. So I will go with Zach Bond. He's obviously coming from the Saints, Wisconsin ties. Jim Leonard probably knows him quite well. So I'm gonna go with Zach Bond and do a prediction on that one. Because on the other side, I really have no idea where the Broncos are truly gonna go. But guys, this was an absolute blast, and it did go long. But I'll tell you, there's no better way to have a deep dive. Right, Lance? There's no better way to have a deep dive into free agency than have a nice little lengthy pod and trying to possibly even build those Broncos, right, Carl? Although I feel like, you're building the Broncos is maybe a little bit more so into the draft, right? Maybe not necessarily,
for our guests into puns.
We do both.
Okay. Anyway, before we go, though, obviously, Lance and Carl, you guys do podcasts over there at Mile High Huddle. Why don't you tell people what you guys have cooking? All right, have cooking down there with the Dove Valley Deep Divers, Lance. And
so for us, we're doing a lot of NFL draft content right now. Eric and I kind of shifted the focus of our show to have him be more of the guy in the limelight. We did his top 100 NFL prospects. This week we're doing the risers and fallers from the combine, how that affects Eric's big board. And then we're just going to continue on cranking out some big time NFL draft content, not only on Dove Valley Deep Divers, but at milehighhuddle.com.
And Carl, I know Nick is celebrating the birth of his baby. Congratulations again to Nick and the birth of his baby. But what do you guys got cooking over there?
Well, so we do our shows on Tuesday, and it seems like all NFL news seems to break on Tuesdays, which is great for us. And so, obviously free agency kicking off here this next week it'd be on Monday, but there'll be still some signings going on there on that Tuesday and stuff. So we'll be doing a lot of talking about free agency, just kind of like what we did here today. I just wrote an article though for Mile High Huddle about what I think the Broncos will do before free agency kicks off, the players that they're going to be cutting, trading, restructuring, all those kind of things, what my prediction is with those. So definitely go check that out because, the Broncos, I know they've been quiet up to this point, but there's some moves coming here pretty soon. They're going to have a Buffalo Bills kind of day before free agency kicks off. And so there might be a couple shocking moves. We'll see. Maybe they don't find a trade partner for a guy that they really wanted to. One of the wide receivers is what I'm kind of thinking. And they just end up having to cut a guy compared to trade him. So, like I said, it's going to be a pretty crazy week around Dove Valley here coming up.
I mean, we don't even know. We know that it's going to be a spread out contract for the whole Russell Wilson thing. We know it's going to be a spread out contract. The question is just what exactly is that going to entail? Because the Broncos haven't officially announced that either. So, how will that necessarily be spread out? So that is going to be something to follow for sure. But for Lance, for Carl, and Brandon and myself, this has been another episode of the Manely Broncos Podcast, and we want to say thank you guys so much. Make sure you subscribe to the MHRT Network channel over here on YouTube, and go check out Carl and Lance's pod over there on the on Mile High Huddle. Again, thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute blast taking a deep dive into NFL free agency.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flame out. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle. Wait a minute,